Thanks, Chair.
Can I welcome members, officers and the public here in the gallery and those watching on the webcast. The London Assembly is the voice of London, composed of 25 members, elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold him to account and scrutinise his policies. This is Mayor's Question Time meeting of the Assembly, which means that all members are invited to attend and ask questions of the Mayor. In case of an emergency and any need to exit the building, guests seating in the public gallery should follow security staff and Assembly members should follow the meeting clerk. Members are also reminded that any electronic devices should not be placed in front of microphones. Can I please ask Rebecca Arnold to confirm apologies for absence?
We have apologies, Chair, from Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you. Before we begin, I would like to welcome the MBA students from Regent's College London. Are you here? Great, okay. And students from a PA training who join us today in the gallery, as well as Year 4 pupils from Manor Longbridge School in Barking and Dagenham.
We might be waiting for them.
Great, bye. Since we all gathered here for the full Assembly meeting on the 3rd of November, many of us travelled to Redbridge and took London's question time, London's questions at People's Question Time. The Economy Committee made a visit to Trust Food Bank as part of its investigation into food insecurity. The GLA Oversight Committee met to discuss the Mayor's Green Bond programme from a governance perspective. The Environment Committee also looked at the green bonds, but from a project's perspective. The Police and Crime Committee published its report into the IOPC. The Transport Committee took a look at rail reform and met London Travel Watch. And yesterday, the Police and Crime Committee questioned the Mayor on the departure of the former Metropolitan Commissioner. Can I ask the Assembly to note the interest set out at item number 2? Okay. Do Assembly members have any other disclosable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality which are not reflected on the Authority Register of Gifts and Hospitality? I take silence meaning that no one has to make any declarations. Can I ask the Assembly to confirm the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on the 6th of October 2022 for me to sign as a correct record? Okay. Can I ask the Assembly to formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period from 30th of September 2022 to 3rd November 2022? And the Mayor will now provide us an oral update for up to 5 minutes in relation to matters occurring since the publication of his report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning.
Thank you, Jacob. Good morning, everyone. I want to begin by drawing people's attention to some shocking figures released today by City Hall. They relate to the number of children who've been admitted to hospital with asthma in London in recent years. Last year, more than 3,600 of our young people were hospitalised with asthma. That's a 64% increase on the previous year, when COVID and multiple lockdowns meant fewer vehicles were on our roads and pollution levels were lower. So what we can see quite clearly is that as London has opened up and traffic levels have gone up, so too have hospital admissions among London's children at an alarming rate. Overcoming the crisis of air pollution is going to be critical to the long-term health and well-being of our children and communities. That's why I've taken some of the boldest and most ambitious action of any mayor anywhere to bring down emissions and clean up our city's air. Because we simply can't tolerate a situation where our children are breathing air so polluted they're falling sick and ending up in hospital or growing up with stunted lungs. Thanks to the success of the ULEZ, we've already cut some of the most harmful pollutants in central London by half. We can and must continue this progress because every Londoner has the right to breathe clean air. Improving air quality and tackling the climate crisis is vital to building a better London for everyone, a city that is fairer, safer, greener and more prosperous for all our communities. We're making huge strides in this direction, from building record numbers of new council homes to delivering huge investments in policing and youth services, which is helping to reduce crime across our city. But we can't do it alone. That's why I've called on the government to step up and provide more support for those Londoners who are struggling. And I hope that's what we'll see in the Chancellor's autumn statement later today, rather than a reckless and wrong-headed return to austerity. Chair, I look forward to answering questions this morning and indeed this afternoon.
Thank you for your statement, Mr. Mayor. I think the first question is on the autumn statement in the name of Assembly Member Joan McCartney. Over to you.
Beg your pardon. Thank you for the question. I'm very concerned that the government will make the choice, and it is a choice, to pursue an austerity agenda at the very point when Londoners and our public services desperately need more support. The scale of the crisis is clear. The results of the latest YouGov poll of Londoners show that half are either financially struggling or just about managing. 44% of Londoners say they will either definitely or probably struggle with their energy bills. That's even with the energy price cap that limits average bills to £2,500 per year. Forecasts that average bills could rise to £3,700 from April mean that further support beyond April 2023 is critical for households and businesses. The Chancellor needs to outline what that support will be, funded by a genuine windfall tax on energy companies. I'm calling on the government to introduce a lifeline tariff to support the most vulnerable Londoners with a minimum floor of domestic energy use before charges begin. But we all know that it's not just about energy bills and that Londoners need wider support to get through this crisis. That's why I've been pressing for welfare benefits to be uprated in line with inflation. Polling shows that it's not just those on benefits that are struggling to afford essentials. And that's why I want to see the Chancellor extend free school meals to all primary school children. 40% of renters say they will struggle to meet rent payment in the next 6 months. I've been asking for the power to freeze private rents for some time, but the seriousness of the situation is such that I'm also now calling for the government to fund a rebate to compensate social housing tenants and shared owners for looming rent increases in April. In addition, London Borough's own budgets must also be protected to allow them to keep up the essential support for Londoners. If we do see austerity 2.0 later today, it will be as a direct result of the government's disastrous mini-budget in September. London shouldn't have to suffer for the government's incompetence.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've had 12 years of Tory economic failure. The recent mini-budget is estimated to have cost the country £30 billion, which is the same that we expect public spending to be cut by. Is it fair that Londoners are having to pay the price for this government's poor economic decisions?
Well, firstly, there's nothing mini about that budget. I mean, it cost all of us a mega fortune. And what you're seeing is ordinary families, small businesses, apparently having to pay the price of the government's incompetence. And it's worth reminding colleagues that actually one of the reasons why we have the smallest growth of any major global country around the world is the choice to have austerity in 2010, a coalition government that chose austerity in 2010, and we're still paying the price now.
Thank you, and thank you for outlining all that you're doing from this office to alleviate issues. But the mini-budget caused instability in our financial systems and in our government. Did that have any bearing on our budgets here at City Hall? And how have you been able to cope, or how are you planning to mitigate that?
Yeah, there have been some consequences. So, as you know, TfL borrows often from external sources. TfL's credit rating was better than the government's, but the rules don't allow for TfL to have a better rating than the government, so TfL's rating was lowered to meet the government's credit rating, and that affects our ability to borrow. We're concerned when we get in the receipts from councils in relation to council tax receipts and business rates that we could see a reduction in those. As you recall, when we set budgets, it's on an estimate, and then we get the receipts in from the councils. So we're extremely concerned about those. There is an upside, I'm afraid, with all this bad news. It's good news there's an upside. but it's because interest rates are so high, which is awful for many families and those who have got the privilege to have a mortgage. It means when we have got money in accounts, we got more return because interest rates are higher.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Pigeon on the culture and work of the emergency services.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I've been clear that wide-ranging reforms are urgently needed, both within the Metropolitan Police Service and the London Fire Brigade. While these organisations face different challenges, which will require different responses, there are cultural issues that must be addressed in both. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services has identified significant issues through its peel inspection of the MPS. Subsequently, the KC Review interim report revealed that MPS misconduct processes are not fit for purpose, with Baroness Casey finding systemic racial bias that must be addressed as a matter of urgency. I continue to support and hold the MPS to account in taking urgent action to reform and address the significant issues raised in these two reports. I'm under no illusions about the challenges ahead, but I'm pleased to be working with Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley to drive forward the necessary cultural change and reform. Sir Mark has been clear that he expects the MPS to increase trust, reduce crime and deliver high standards. He has assured me that through these strategic priorities he will address the concerns raised by HMI CFRS and by Baroness Casey to deliver the priorities in the Police and Crime Plan and improve the service provided to Londoners. The London Fire Brigade is still awaiting the findings of its culture review led by Nazir Afzal OBE, which is due to be published soon. I expect the findings to raise some challenging issues. When Commissioner Andy Rowe launched the independent culture review in March 2021, he was very clear that there are areas within the LFB that require change. This was reiterated in the LFB's most recent inspection report undertaken by HMI CFRS. Ahead of the findings of the culture review, the Brigade has made important progress in some areas, such as improving diversity of recruitment and developing its leadership training and community engagement. Nazir Afzal's findings will give a clear steer on the work required to turn the Brigade into the organisation Londoners, the Commissioner and I expect. In my regular bilaterals with each Commissioner, I'm being briefed on the actions being taken to reform each service. My Deputy Mayors and I continue to support and hold the MPS and LFB to account, and I'll not stop until we've delivered the reforms our city deserves.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Baroness Casey's interim report is a tough read. Internal allegations relating to racism, sexual misconduct and other discriminatory behaviours that are less likely to result in a case to answer decision in the misconduct process. Likewise, repeat and patterns of unacceptable behaviour are just not treated collectively, preventing decisive action. This is not something that a simple new policy or training course can change instantly. There is an accepted style of behaviour by some officers. What are you personally doing to tackle and remove this kind of rotten culture, this element in the Met?
Well, in the Met, one of the first things I did was to tell the former Commissioner I'd lost confidence in her. And it's really important. Your question asserts rightly that it's not one policy, it's about whole organisational change, and that starts from the top. Both Commissioners, Andy Rowe and Mark Rowley, understand the importance of leadership at the top. Organisational changes come from the top. But you highlighted a real challenge there is, which is staff members having no confidence in the process because it, for example, takes so long. The average conduct case, 430 odd days in the MPS. What confidence can you have as an officer when you're seeing that happening if you have got a concern to be made? So Mark's plan, which also addresses the concerns raised by the HMI, are around speeding up the process, giving officers confidence, better training for senior officers, but having a culture where there is not just a zero-tolerance approach, but an anti-racist, anti-sexist approach as well.
Okay, and you're supporting that. And clearly I know national change is needed in the misconduct process. But there are some other local changes. You know, report after report I have read over many years, not just the recent ones, constantly raises the issue of supervision in the Met, the quality of supervisors, the number of supervisors, the training of supervisors. So what are you doing to ensure that this important level of management has the resources and confidence to root out these corrupt officers and practices?
What you're highlighting is a consequence, as the symptoms of the cuts, because what happened is many of the experienced officers left and the ratio of junior officers to experienced officers is skewed. I'll give you an example of how this pans out. At Notting Hill Carnival this year, 80% of the officers, it was their first carnival. Why? Because they're all new, right? And that breathes through the whole organisation in relation to the skew of junior officers versus experienced officers. So there's got to be more supervision, as you correctly say, the report's highlighted, and as you highlighted before. Those supervisors need proper support and proper training.
Yeah.
But what the police are also doing is providing a system where officers who come into a station of BCU have proper mentoring and better support. So that probationary period is really important in relation to that 6 months when you're in an area. If there are issues with you, rather than them being forgotten about because you move on, they're looked into.
Great. And when you read in the KC interim report that in one borough team, 37% of female employees had experienced unwanted sexual advances or touching in the last 6 months. Absolutely extraordinary. We know this is a mammoth task the new Commissioner faces. Will you look to appoint a senior leader in change management and culture who knows what excellent looks like, who can work with SAMARC to help turn around the Met Police?
Spot on, and SAMARC is doing that, bringing in external expertise and also making sure that people's lived experiences matter. One of the reasons why I rejected many of these suggestions Dame Cressida had to do the review is because many of them didn't have the lived experiences Dame Louise Casey has, and it's really important to understand the importance of that, and SAMARC gets that.
Well, I welcome that. Previously, you've said no to that, so I really welcome that change. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I have an indication from Assemblymember Bukhari that she wishes to come into this on the same topic as what Assemblymember Pigeons asked about. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And as you mentioned, Nazir Afzal's culture review on the London Fire Brigade is something that we're all really looking forward to seeing, because I'm sure he's going to have some tough challenges ahead in terms of what he's going to be coming across in terms of issues to do with the culture and the London Fire Brigade. And the recent HMI inspection report actually did outline some very worrying culture issues in the London Fire Brigade. What was really was quite worrying was the fact that 57% of the staff who responded to the HMI survey said they were not confident in the mechanisms for providing feedback. What additional assessment will you be doing to make sure that all staff feel like their voice is heard?
I've had the chance to meet with Nazir Afzal to discuss his review, and it's often not wise to use one case as an example of how bad things are. But when you look at the case of Jaden Matthew Francois Esprit, who killed himself in August 2020, not only is it heartbreaking, and our thoughts and prayers with his family, but I think it exposes a bigger issue. And that's one of the motivations of the Commissioner to get in an expert to look into the culture of the fire service, because you're absolutely right in relation to some of the challenges that Nazir Afzal will highlight that need to be addressed. The good news, and it is good news, is that we have a Commissioner already there who understands these challenges and understands the importance of addressing them. Not complacent, not arrogant, not defensive, understanding we've got problems and wants to address them head on. Part of it is what you say in the culture. What is the point of all this hard work recruiting a black firefighter in, a woman firefighter in, when they go to a station and they're almost driven out after 6 months? And that's why it's really important to from recruitment all the way until when people eventually leave, when they retire, their experience is a good one.
Now, I'm so pleased that there has been some progress, and I met the first hijabi Muslim female firefighter recently. But there are still concerns, and there's a belief within the brigade that standards for new recruits are being lowered in order to recruit more trainees from BAME backgrounds. Now, this sentiment will inevitably breed some sort of tension amongst the LFB, and so what efforts are you going to do to make sure we combat this issue, to ease that tension on recruitment?
Well, I've seen no evidence of that, and it's worth asking who's raising those points in relation to the quality of BAME recruits versus the quality of non-BAME recruits, the quality of female recruits versus the quality of male recruits. The LFB are quite keen to make sure that the fire service, by the way, so is the Met Police Commissioner, looks more like the city that we serve. You saw in Grenfell the lack of trust of that community with the fire service. Some of the cases and some of the experiences that Grenfell residents had on the night from firefighters is shocking. And that's why it's so important to make sure that we, recruit as widely as possible and increase in race standards rather than the other way around.
And it's not just about ethnicity and race. There's been a drop in female cadets. There's a low retention in particularly women. And the brigade did commit to a Privacy for All programme in 2019. However, only one station out of 103 have prioritised the changes necessary for this to happen. And what I would like to see is you making sure that the LFB make these fundamental changes necessary, but for all women, and to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and that they are that all buildings are accessible, whether it's faith, sexuality, gender. Everyone needs to be welcome within the buildings. What will you be doing to make sure that this happens before the next inspection report?
I mean, this is one of the concerns of the Commissioner, HMI, and indeed Nazir Afzal, that many of the buildings are 150 years old and, frankly speaking, are designed for one gender. Right? There aren't spaces for in some stations for men and women to sleep separately, separate facilities and so forth. One of the strategies around estates renewal and estates updating is to address some of these historical issues. It is a big issue in relation to some of the rotas that some of the staff do. You'll be aware in some of the downtime, because fires can happen any time in London, as you know. It's a big problem in relation to that, particularly when you've got concerns of the ones you've raised about the complaints being made as well. Some of this, frankly speaking, can't be resolved overnight without huge capital investment. But it is some of it is about the fabric of these buildings and the design of these buildings. But the Commissioner understands these challenges, indeed I do, and so does the Deputy Mayor.
It's not just about the buildings itself as well. It is about the way many of the people within the LFB feel. If they're not feeling as if they're being listened to, if they're feeling as if they're not being heard, and you mentioned the tragic loss of somebody actually committing suicide because they said that when they were within the LFB, there was jokes about his culture, the food he ate. There is an issue of racism that we need to tackle. So what more can we do to make sure that everyone feels welcome?
I think we're in danger of putting the cart before the horse in relation to Nazir Afzal's report. I think what's important is for Nazir Afzal to publish his report. He'll do so shortly for the Commissioner and myself and the Deputy Mayor to respond to that report. But what the Commissioner is doing is making sure he's not waiting for the report. So he's already put in train a number of things to address the issues raised by Jaden's awful and tragic death. And it's really important that we support him in that progress. One of the things we could do is have from the government today more money for the LFB rather than austerity 2.0.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And the Lib Dem Democrats are out of time now. Okay, great. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Hall, and it's on the Police and Crime Committee.
Thank you, Chair. I was pleased to be able to address these issues in full yesterday. London has elected me to support and hold the Met Police Commission to account, and that's exactly what I've done and will continue to do. I will make no apology for demanding better for London and for putting the interests of the city I love first. If Londoners do not have trust and confidence in the police cannot do their job of keeping the capital safe. I have a legal duty as London's Police and Crime Commissioner to scrutinise the MPS Commissioner's performance and to challenge it when there are failings. My role under Section 3 of the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011 requires me to ensure that the Met Police Service is both efficient and effective, and to hold the Commissioner to account both for their performance and for the exercise of the functions of persons under their direction and control. This is what I did with the former Commissioner. The discussions and meetings that took place in the run-up to the former Commissioner's decision to resign were entirely in keeping with my statutory role. At the former Commissioner's watch, trust in the police fell to an all-time low, following a series of terrible incidents and scandals. Londoners were losing confidence in her ability to address these issues and lead the deep-rooted change that was needed in the Met Police Service, as was I. We now have a new Commissioner of the Met Police Service, Sir Mark Rowley, who has demonstrated that he is determined to be a reforming Commissioner, committed to implementing a robust plan to rebuild public trust and confidence in the police and to driving through the urgent reforms and step change in culture and performance Londoners deserve. Sir Mark's clear and comprehensive plan to win back public trust and confidence includes pursuing wrongdoing by officers of all ranks. I'm confident that Sir Mark Rowley understands the scale and urgency of the task at hand. I've also been clear that I'll support him in his work whilst holding him to account, not least in ensuring that the Met Police Service is both efficient and effective, as is my statutory duty. I want to assure Londoners that I'll continue to support and hold the Met Police Service and their leadership to account so we can see the changes the public deserves.
Thank you. As normal, you didn't answer the question as it was asked, but I wasn't going to share this with you, but last night I got a message from a friend of mine saying the Mayor's evidence at the Police and Crime Committee was a masterclass in diversion, deflection and denial. Unhappy with the real facts established in an extremely thorough and conspicuously impartial investigation, he adopted his alternative facts. And I think you've just proved that you just deflect the whole time. But a question on the report, Mr. Mayor. You told Sir Thomas Windsor that when you told the former Commissioner that one or the other of us is going to be substituted, you were concerned about the adverse effect that issues might have on your standing for election in 2024. Could you explain your thinking on how the events in the Met Police relate to your standing for election?
The point I made yesterday to the Police and Crime Committee is a question I was asked in relation to the passage in Sir Tom's report. I'm quite clear that the plan that the former Commissioner had in relation to the support she wanted in relation to communications and the so-called joint plan, the seminar, was medium to long term, not short term, and we needed an immediate response. And so that's why I said it's really important for there to be a plan that's urgent, and that affects both the Commissioner and myself, because clearly there is a link, as Sir Mark has confirmed, between less trust, high standards, and there being, therefore, if there's less trust, more crime. What we want is more trust, less crime. And clearly, when you are the Mayor of London, you want to continue to make progress in reducing crime. Your ability to reduce crime is hindered if there is a lack of trust in the police, because we police by consent. You're not going to come forward if you're a victim. You're not going to come forward if you're a witness. You're not going to come forward to join the police service. So trust and confidence is intrinsically linked with crime fighting.
Okay, so going back to the comment, one or the other of us is going to be substituted. The Sir Thomas review states, the Commissioner told me that she understands the phrase as a threat to her continuation in office, and that you could see why she might think that. What did you expect her or want her to think when you made that remark?
There was some urgency for us to respond to the series of scandals, and the response for the Commissioner wasn't commensurate with how Londoners and myself saw these scandals. And what you need from the leader is what you see from Sir Mark, a sense of urgency, a sense of immediacy, and a lack of defensiveness. And what you need is action straight away. So recognition of the issues around not just Sarah Everard and Bieber and Nicole and Charles Q and Bianca Williams and Daniel Morgan and the Stephen Port murders, but
yes,
also of the examples we saw in black and white around Charing Cross in Operation Houghton.
Yeah, you can list them all. We're actually talking about what you think that the Commissioner thought about that. I mean, why did you use that analogy? You often use football analogies, and it's basically about a player being taken out of game before it's finished.
Well, quite, because what we can't do is wait 2-3 years for a seminar, long-term plan on communications. What we need is urgency.
Yeah.
And we've seen, by the way, from Sir Mark, urgency, and that's what I'd expect from any Commissioner when it comes to a series of scandals.
It's amazing, Mr Mayor, that you asked for the Commissioner's extension into her contract. I think it was on the 19th of January, you said how pleased you were with her, and suddenly your mind changed. I'm sure we will go back to these meetings. Not nearly enough was discussed yesterday, so hopefully we'll be able to flesh some of the truth out going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Was there a question there, Assembly Member Hall?
I think you heard several questions.
I heard what I heard was a statement at the end.
So I'm now saying thank you very much, Chairman.
That's not a question, that's a statement. I want to be mindful that Assembly members should be asking questions and not making public statements on this occasion. It is Mayor's question time. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Russell, and it's on gaps in sport for road traffic victims.
Can I thank you very much for raising this important issue on Road Safety Week, and you've been assiduous in raising these issues over the last few years. TfL and the MPS are working with Break to help raise awareness of road danger this week, and we maintain our commitment to Vision Zero this week and throughout the year. Through my Vision Zero programme, I'm committed to eliminating deaths and serious injuries from London's roads. We've already made significant progress, but I know we need to do much more. Part of this is ensuring that victims and their families are properly supported and that their voices are heard. No road collision victim should feel alone. In September, I attended a listening session with victims of road traffic collisions that was organised by TfL with the support of victims' organisations, including Road Peace and Break. I heard again firsthand the effect road collisions have. Right now, some victims and families are not getting the support they need and deserve. TfL and I are making the case to the government for a long-term national support system so victims and their families across the country receive support. Hope that a system like this will be included in the government's forthcoming road safety plan. While organisations including Break and Road Peace do great work in supporting road collision victims, one issue with third sector organisations operating independently of local agency is that the onus is on the victims to seek out their services. We should not be asking people who are experiencing loss and trauma to take the burden of care on themselves. In London, TfL's Sarah Hope Line is an additional service that provides support to those who have been involved in or affected by a life-changing incident on the TfL network, and I see Sarah's in the gallery today. In addition to this, working with the Victims Commissioner and the Metropolitan Police, we're exploring options for enhancing victim support through agencies that specialise in road trauma support. Our aim is to increase the number of people supported and improve the offer of support to those left bereaved or left with life-changing injuries. As part of this, we're looking at formal mechanisms for proactive referral in the aftermath of a collision, removing the burden from victims and bereaved families of having to search out help. In addition to those sadly killed or seriously injured, thousands more people suffer less severe injuries on the roads. These can also be traumatic and have long-term consequences for those involved. I've asked the Vision Zero team at TfL to look into options to provide an easily accessible information hub to help support these victims too.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. And in particular, thank you for recognising that it is not fair for the bereaved families to be taking the burden in the aftermath of these very serious and very traumatising collisions. Now, I briefly want to thank your Walking and Cycling Commissioner, Will Norman, because he's done a lot of work with me on Vision Zero since we spoke last December. In particular, the listening exercise was one of the things that we had talked about, and that is very much appreciated. And as you say, it is World Day, well, you didn't say, but it is World Day of Remembrance for road traffic victims on Monday, and that's why I was wanting to talk today about the support that is available for bereaved families and people who are seriously injured on the road. Now, as well as Sarah Hope in the gallery, Mandy Garner is in the gallery today. She's the mother of Anisha, who was sadly killed in a shocking hit-and-run collision in February 2020 after stepping off a bus in Brixton Hill. And I've talked with her recently about her experience since Anisha's death. And she explained the delays in getting in contact with the family liaison officer. And overall, she said, and I quote, "You never get told anything. You have to follow everything up." So your recognition of this in your opening statement is very much appreciated. And so actually my first question has fallen, because you clearly do agree that bereaved families should not have to take that burden. So I'm going to move straight to my second question, which is that later, when I was chasing up the progress towards the inquest for Mandy's daughter, she discovered that there was to be no inquest, and that Transport for London and the police and the council had met and decided the case was so criminal there was no point in investigating or doing anything else. But Mandy hadn't been told or even invited to the meeting. Now, this had consequences. It meant that she had to try and get a death certificate without an inquest. But a lot of the information had been lost in the system. And by September 2021, when she eventually got the death certificate, it was too late to use the Tell Us Once service. So she had to work out by herself all the places she needed to send her daughter's death certificate to. Now, this prompted me to check the MOPAC London Victim and Witness Service. And I spoke with their live chat, and they told me that hit and run is not an area they normally support unless it was prosecuted as a murder. Now, I know you don't control the criminal justice system, but do you think MOPAC's London Victim and Witness Service could provide more targeted support for families who are bereaved by road traffic collisions?
Well, firstly, Chair, can I just acknowledge Mandy as well in the public gallery, and like Sarah, she's also suffering a terrible loss, and I'm incredibly sorry for the loss of your daughter, Anisha. Mandy, genuinely, I'm really sorry for the way you've been treated as well, subsequent to Anisha's death, which can only add to the trauma and the grief you're going through. I'm really terribly sorry. Karen, can also put on record my thanks to you for your assiduous lobbying of me and TfL on these issues. Genuinely, the progress you've made is thanks partly to your chivian, so thank you for that. Can I take this away? One of the challenges that the Mayor's Office Police and Crime have is they support victims of crime, and without in any way diminishing the grief of Mandy and the support she deserves. This is one of the challenges. So an amazing stat which you'll recognise is there are 700 homicides across the country a year, and thankfully they get decent support, most of them. There are 4,000 deaths on our roads. Most of them receive almost no support, as you suggested in your question. So let me take away what we can do in relation to additional support for hit and run, because for the reasons you suggest, by inference, they're a crime.
Yes.
And also, they may not be serious in relation to a league table of crime, but they're serious to the families. So can I take that away and come back to you and also to Mandy and Sarah about that?
That would be very much appreciated. And the other thing that would be great if you could also take away is just the publication of information, because people don't know how to contact the support that is available, like the Sarah Hope line. So if you could take that away as well, that would be much appreciated.
That's one of the things, to make it proactive rather than being reactive to.
Thank you.
That was a very helpful exchange. Okay. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Duval, and it's on deprived urban areas and the Mayor's budget.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. Despite what some would have you believe, you know that London has some of the most deprived communities in the country. You know they require support and funding just as much as other parts of the UK. And I've made it clear to ministers that the government's mission to level up the UK must not mean levelling down London. Encouragingly, Michael Gove, now reappointed as Secretary of State for Levelling Up after a short break, wants to focus on urban regeneration. I look forward to working with him again on this issue. I'm using the powers and funding at my disposal to tackle the urgent challenges facing London's most deprived communities. Since I took responsibility for the adult education budget, I've made significant steps to support low-income and unemployed Londoners to access fully funded learning. I'm investing £380 million this year, which will help Londoners progress into further learning and better paid work. Over a third of London's £144 million share of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is being allocated to boroughs to both support local businesses and tackle the communities and regenerate them. The remainder will be invested in projects that grow local businesses and support Londoners into training and work. My regeneration team will be investing £12 million this financial year in projects focused on areas of need based on deprivation and climate change risks. This builds the investment from my Good Growth Fund of more than £17 million in projects ranging from community food hubs to affordable workspace, many in the most deprived neighbourhoods of the capital. Despite everything we're doing, though, it remains the case we have the most centralised democracy in the Western world. This is holding back the potential of London and the UK's other great towns, cities and regions. The government's decision to cancel their centralised investment zone scheme less than 60 days after asking local leaders across the country to bid for it is a case in point. It's my firm belief that in order to help our communities through the cost of living crisis, we need more devolution. And I'll continue to make the case alongside other city and local leaders.
Assemblyman Duval, can I ask you to put the microphone, please, on?
I think the Mayor heard what I said on that, but thank you for that. Secondly, can I just say, given the announcements that are going to be made today and the impact on communities, do you think there's a case for you to lead a coalition of cross-party and other stakeholders in London to make those urgent representations about London's needs? You rightly said in answer to my question about some of the problems of people understanding those needs and about deprivation here in London taking place. I don't wish to take it away from other parts of the country, and I've heard you say that in other places. So do you think that it would be reasonable to do that, given the emergencies that we're likely to face from today?
I think there is cross-party support in London for this issue, and by the way, I think all of us would congratulate Councillor Teresa O'Neill, who today becomes Baroness O'Neill, and she's been introduced today. But I know Teresa, and I know the Lib Dem leaders and I know the Labour leaders all agree on a cross-party basis that London sometimes, there's a feeling outside London that the roads are paved with gold. And I think the idea of a cross-party approach to the government is a good one. I'm a bit nervous because our current Prime Minister said comments during the leadership contest, which I think, to be generous, are unfortunate. But I think it's a really good idea. Can I take that away, Len, and speak to London Council, see if we can organise that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Chair, can I just intervene and just say we must also congratulate Fiona Twycross, who also has gone into the House of Lords this week, and we're all very thrilled for her as well. Thank you.
Indeed, I think we all want to congratulate our former colleague from here, who's now in the House of Lords. Thank you for pointing it out, Assembly Member Hall. Did you later on?
No, I had actually confused MQT and plenary. So.
Okay.
Sam, you speak for me there.
it all fades into one. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Rogers, and it's on the ULEZ expansion.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. Action must be taken to improve air quality across the capital. The statistics are stark. Thousands of Londoners are dying prematurely every year from long-term exposure to air pollution. Over 500,000 Londoners live with asthma and are more vulnerable to the impact of toxic air. And every hospital, medical centre and care home across London, both inner and outer, are in areas that breach the World Health Organization's guidelines for nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter. We must act. The proposal to expand the ULEZ London-wide is designed to help address the triple challenges of improving air quality and public health, tackling the climate emergency and reducing traffic congestion across London. The Central London ULEZ transformed air quality in Central London, with air pollution reducing by nearly half within the zone. Since I expanded the ULEZ to Inner London in autumn 2021, 4 million Londoners living in the expanded zone and are breathing cleaner air. Widening the ULEZ to all of London would benefit the 5 million Londoners who live in outer London and many more who visit for work or leisure. This proposal strikes the best balance between maximising the health and environmental benefits for Londoners while minimising the cost to those who rely on the use of motor vehicles. TfL takes its responsibility to run robust and legally compliant consultations extremely seriously and has run proper and fair consultations for over 20 years. Best practice has been followed in this latest consultation. An independent consultancy analysed every consultation response received before the deadline and shared their findings with TfL in September. TfL is incorporating these findings into their final report. All consultation responses are reviewed and analysed, and TfL responds to all issues raised. Only responses that contravene TfL's policies on work-related violence and aggression are excluded. I'm simply unable to comment further on feedback from consultation responses and the content of the report until I receive it. Once I've received the report and other consultation materials from TfL and the proposed revision to the transport strategy has been approved and published, I'll be in a position to make my decision on whether or not the ULEZ will be expanded London-wide. We have too often seen action delayed in the UK and around the world because it's viewed as being too hard or politically inconvenient. I'm committed to continuing action to reduce the impact on Londoners of toxic air, whatever decision I may take on the expansion of the ULEZ London-wide.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your answer. I'm sure you'll have seen there's a new YouGov poll that's been released today showing that 60% of Londoners are opposed to the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone. Do you accept that this is the overwhelming majority in opposition that you spoke of before?
I've not seen the poll.
We'll make sure we send it to you, but 60% of Londoners are, in fact, against expanding ULEZ. Now, you and I, we've discussed this many times, and clearly we disagree about expanding ULEZ. But with that said, I am aware, and I very much appreciate that this is something of a personal mission for you. So much so that you've actually written a book that's due out on tackling climate change and that sort of thing in May. Hands up who's got it on pre-order. I think might need a little bit more PR. But in a recent Twitter thread that you wrote to promote that book, one of the things you said, and also not just promote your book, but also to outline your sort of approach to climate change and this sort of issues, you said that coalitions are key. You won't get anywhere if you don't engage with your political opponents. Now, we, this group here, are your most immediate, most persistent political opponents. So my question was, when was the last time that you proactively reached out and engaged with us over ULEZ expansion?
Well, I think we'll see later on today, Chair, when we discuss the MTS revision. There are 4 groups in the Assembly. There's the Labour group, the Lib Dem group, the Green group, and the Conservative group. And we'll see what percentage, when it comes to those 4 groups, support the revision of the MTS and those
that wasn't my question. My question was, when did you last proactively reach out and engage with us? As per your tweet, we are your political opponents. How and when have you engaged with us on ULEZ expansion?
Well, I engage with Londoners all the time of different political persuasions, not relying on gatekeepers, but relying on speaking directly to Londoners, sometimes community groups, sometimes health groups, sometimes community activists,
not us. We are your political opponents. So every month at Mayor's Question
Time, engaging now.
You're not proactively reaching out. You're not trying to build that coalition that you tweeted about. So every month at Mayor's Question Time, Assemblymember Garrett, Assemblymember Fortune, Assemblymember Prince, myself and others, we are highly critical of ULEZ expansion. You rarely engage with the arguments when we're in the room, let alone when the broadcast has stopped. And I think that's a shame. I'm not saying that because we feel that we're big, important people. It's that we represent hundreds of thousands of Londoners who do disagree with your policies. And we could sit down and we could share ideas. We could talk you through why those Londoners disagree. You could outline your arguments. And I remember a few MQTs ago, you said to Assemblymember Hall that all she needed to do to speak to you was pick up the phone. You've never picked up the phone to engage with us, and I think that's a shame. So will you do that? Will you engage with us on this issue?
I think the record of my engagement with the Conservative group is your opposition to ULEZ. Let's be frank, I've got a record of all the times you've been consistent, to give you credit, in opposing ULEZ, opposing the T-charge in 2017, opposing the ULEZ in central London, opposing the expansion of ULEZ up to the inner and North Circular and South Circular, and opposing, if I should decide to do so, expanding ULEZ to all of London-wide. I don't want to patronise you and disrespect you by thinking I can ever persuade you to change your mind, because I think you've made up your mind. And I think we've got to be honest about that. You've made up your mind, and I've got to respect that I won't be able to persuade you that air pollution is a priority, and that the ULEZ Central London and the expansion to North and South Circular has been incredibly successful. And I respect your position. We just have to agree to disagree.
Well, first, to correct something you said, this group did not oppose the Central London ULEZ. We did oppose you bringing it in earlier than was planned, but we didn't oppose the principle of the Central London ULEZ. Now, the second part of your tweet was that you should prioritise spending time listening to everyday citizens. So I end my questioning where I started. Will you listen to the more than 60% of Londoners who don't want you to expand the ultra-low emission zone?
Well, firstly, I'd encourage you to buy the book so you can learn more about some of the strategy and the tactics. And please carry on if you can. I appreciate that the following is quite small. Use your social media to advertise the book as well, because the more people that know about the book, hopefully increase sales as well. But I speak and engage with Londoners all the time. I think talking numbers, I think there's 1.2 million Londoners who voted for me at the last election, a record, I'm told, for sitting mayors. And the one before that was the record, 1.3 million Londoners. So I can talk numbers all day long if you want.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I genuinely look forward to reading the book. I think it should be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Assemblymember Rogers. I have an indication from Assemblymember Garrett and then Assemblymember Deval. First, Assemblymember Garrett.
Morning. So you haven't yet made up your mind whether you're going to do the London-wide expansion. Is that what I gather? It sounded like a question to me. Have you not yet have you made up your mind yet whether to do the London-wide expansion?
So I've not decided whether to expand the ULEZ London-wide. I'm expecting a report from TfL before the end of this year. What I'll do is consider the report from TfL. It'll include a report in relation to the consultations, various other pieces of work that TfL have done,
I think
and
this
then I'll
is
make
what you
my
just
decision.
said before. No, I appreciate that. So is there a section on London-wide ULEZ expansion in your book?
No, because no decision has been made.
So, but your book is due out in May. So that would be just before the ULEZ expansion would happen, if it were to happen.
I'd encourage you to order the book now
So
and see for yourself in May.
It feels like the level of
think
hands
this is
going up
really
earlier.
good. One of the
so
ways
your book, hold on, your book is due out in May, so it would be due out a couple of months before ULEZ expansion would happen if you go ahead. It would completely undermine the whole thesis of your book if the section in it that you have yet to write about London-wide ULEZ expansion says, I decided not to go ahead for these reasons. Would it not undermine? Because the whole thesis is this is how you build coalitions with your opposition. We saw that just now. And this is how you overcome opposition for difficult environmental policies. How could you put a book out in May about that, having just decided not to proceed with ULEZ?
Chair, with your permission, can I talk about the book? As I've been asked to do.
You can answer the question that I have asked.
I think you have been given an open license,
Excuse me, Chair.
Thank you.
The
No,
question
no,
I
that's
hold
very
very clear.
It's not Susan chairing today,
You're
like
running down the
yesterday.
clock
I'm
because you
partial
don't want
chair.
to answer the question. Because
Chair, you don't need advice from Andrew Boff. Chair, I've been asked a question about my book. I've been asked a question about my book.
How could your book talk about
ULEZ months before? No, I've been asked a question. I've been asked a question.
I'm the chair. Assemblymember Garrett has asked a question about your book. I think you are able to answer it.
Well,
this is a
thank you,
decision
Chair.
made by the Assemblymember Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. No,
why
Chair,
is my time being wasted on a message?
Hang on, Assemblymember Garrett. You asked a question.
Yes.
Now I'm making a decision.
Well, thank
May I
you for
can ask the
wasting my
question?
time. Let's hear the counsel.
I'm just checking the pause has come off to the Secretariat. So, Chair, the question I was asked was about my book, Breathe, which comes out in May next year. And it's a story about my journey in relation to when I...
Sorry, I didn't ask you to read the blurb. I've read the blurb. I said, how
No,
can
Assembly Garrett.
No, I'm not asking for the Mayor to monologue
Mr.
on
Garrett,
his favourite topic,
Assembly
which is
Garrett,
himself.
I make a decision.
Chair,
if you
Chair,
want to challenge my decision, you're going the right way around it.
Excuse me, Chair. My question was, how can you bring out a book in May about difficult environmental decisions having just decided not to proceed with ULEZ?
And the Mayor will answer it. And the Mayor will answer it.
I bet he doesn't.
The Mayor will answer you.
I'm just checking that the pause has stopped from Ms. Arnold.
I think this is an attempt by Assemblymember Garrett to build some bridges with you, Mr. Mayor. Can you please answer the question?
Yeah, Chair. The best way to build a bridge is to firstly pre-order the book, and secondly, the book is really important because what the book is about my journey to discovering how toxic the air in London was, because it's the killer in the air is invisible. You can't see the nitrogen dioxide, the particulate matter, or some of the pollution that comes from our area. So you can be training for a marathon to raise money for charity and not realise that as a consequence of your training, something you're doing to get fit, you're actually breathing in the poison and being diagnosed subsequently.
I think they get the idea, Mr. Mayor, that what the book is about, and we're giving you London-wide time to advertise your book. Thank you to the
But
for
Chair,
this.
I'll leave some suspense so people buy the book without
Thank you.
explaining what's going to be.
I think now we'll go back to Assemblymember Garrett.
So I think I win my bet. So the book comes out in May. How can you bring out a book in May about environmental leadership and overcoming opposition and making difficult decisions if you have just decided, which you say you've not yet decided, you might decide not to expand ULEZ? How can the book in May? It undermines your thesis, doesn't it? Which
Chair,
you just outlined.
As anybody who's marketing a book will tell you, you don't give away the ending. And so I've explained to
So
you
the ending of the book might be that you decided
I've
not to
explained the
expand
beginning
ULEZ.
of this
Hang on,
book.
Garrett. Let the Mayor answer now, please.
And I'd encourage other politicians from other parties to talk about the book as much as they can between now and next May.
Great. Thank you.
They're still not going to buy it.
So your position, Mr. Mayor, is, having just pitched your book, which is fine, I think you need some help with that. So your position is that you still have an open mind whether or not you will proceed with London-wide ULEZ.
On the serious point about whether the decision to expand the ULEZ has been made, the answer is no. It hasn't been made. I'll receive the report from TfL before the end of this year, make my decision based upon the report I receive from TfL.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Garrett. The next, hang on. Now, the next question interventions, rather, is from Assembly Member Duval on this?
Chair, this has got to be one of the most important decisions or important policies that over the administrations that this authority has ever taken, whether it's the Office of the Mayor or whether the London Assembly debates these issues. I'm confused. I'm constantly confused by the members opposite. I'm going to name them and let them come back and say what they want, whether it's Neil Garrett, Rogers or even Sean Bailey, because one of the confusions I've got, they said they didn't oppose the central ULEZ. Actually, Sean Bailey put it in his manifesto and said he would oppose it. And actually, you know what the real issue is? It's not just their opposition. They ship and shift all over the place about trying to find reasons not to do it. The issue was, Mr. Mayor, they delayed it. Boris Johnson had this on the table and they delayed it, and we could have been a number of years ahead with cleaner air, better air quality in London. And people have suffered because of their delays in not moving forward much earlier under Boris Johnson, because he never had the courage to do this. And sometimes it takes courage to make a difference. Do you not agree about what the problems of delay have caused in implementing some of the policies around low admission for policies here in London?
Can I just say, Chair, that the member is absolutely right. This is a matter of life and death. And let me be clear, the consequence of having a charlatan as a mayor, which is what Johnson was, is he buried a report which showed there were 400 schools, more than 400 schools in areas where the air was unlawful. He buried that report away. And when you listen to Rosamond Kissy-Deborah, and she tells you that had she known about the consequences of air pollution, had she known what was happening around her community, she would have behaved differently towards her daughter and how she looked after her. It is a matter of life and death. And I'm not willing to duck these tough issues when it comes to me to be made later on this year, or to kick the can down the road. And by the way, just like 20 years ago, with people denying climate change, and those very same people are now trying to delay action, you'd have the same with air pollution. 20 years ago, denying that air pollution was an issue. Now they can't deny it anymore because the science is clear that the dead kids are there. They're trying to delay action. And I think what's important is for this generation of politicians to be bold rather than for air pollution to be the tobacco of the 2020s.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Mame on homelessness.
Can I thank you for this really important question, particularly as we face a cost of living crisis? Yes, I remain deeply concerned about the cost of living crisis and increase in housing costs this winter. Research I commissioned in July showed that 47% of private renters had their rents put up in the last 6 months. And for those with mortgages, 35% had already seen their monthly bills increase, with no sign of light at the end of the tunnel. This year, my Rough Sleeping Accommodation programme will provide over £100 million of funding to housing providers in London. The Rough Sleeping Accommodation programme delivers vital long-term homes for rough sleepers and support for the residents of those homes. The programme has already provided 900 of these homes, with over 500 more homes to be delivered by March. Since 2018, councils across London have started over 13,000 City Hall funded council homes, and council home building in London has reached its highest level since the 1970s. For every 100 new social rented homes built, 45 are made available for families or individuals who are homeless or threatened with homelessness. The budget for my rough sleeping services is over £90 million, and through my Life Off the Streets programme, I'm funding a wide range of pan-London responses to rough sleeping, including No Second Night Out, Street Link and Rapid Response Outreach. These locate, reach and support Londoners to leave life on the streets for good. Through my Right to Buy back fund, I'm also helping councils to acquire homes and make them available at pace to households in their waiting lists or as in-house temporary accommodation for homeless households. Since July 2021, I've allocated funds to help councils turn over 1,000 market homes into affordable homes. My London plan aims to tackle the root causes of the shortage by building high-quality new homes across our city. But we also need the government to step up and deal with the most pressing factors pushing people into homelessness: an insecure private rented sector with no rent controls and inadequate support from benefits. I continue to call for a lift to the benefit cap, which will help prevent Londoners becoming homeless.
Thank you, Mayor Khan. I had the pleasure of attending the Private Renters Summit earlier this week, along with my colleague, Assemblymember Sheikh. And at that, Baroness Alicia Kennedy said that London's housing crisis is a rental crisis and needs to be seen through that lens. And the reason I asked tie the question about homelessness to the private rented sector is because 56,000 Londoners, households across London, are in temporary accommodation, and much of that is in the private rented sector. With we know that there have been reports this week of a boy who sadly died in social housing in Rochdale, but these standards in the private rented sector are twice as bad across the stock in England and Wales, and those people are dealing with. So there will be, thankfully, an increase in line with inflation, we're told, in the budget today for benefits. But those benefits and wages still don't cover the bills, let alone the rents. And so I just wonder what we could do more here in London to support those people, because you have mentioned the 13,000 City Hall funded homes, which is really welcome. But what more can we do to make sure that people have homes that they afford and are taken out of homelessness permanently?
Well, firstly, thank you for mentioning the awful case of Awar Bishak in Rochdale, a 2-year-old child who lost his life. You will know, as I remember as when I was an MP, often seeing constituents with these sorts of mouldy conditions in their homes, right? And so we've got an issue not just in relation to the lack of supply not meeting demand, but when you think about it, an illogical decision for taxpayers through housing benefit to be paying private landlords rent, often in inadequate properties, rather than building more genuinely affordable homes. And so from City Hall, we're doing all that we can within the limited budgets we have. Let's be frank, most of the budget that we have comes from the government, and we're very grateful for the support they give us, but it's not enough. And so we need something like 8 times the financial package we receive from the government, as indeed, by the way, do councils and housing associations. And it's really important the government steps in relation to, yes, we need tough enforcement, we need an Ofsted-style inspection for affordable housing, or a social rent commissioner, but we need financial support as well for these councils, housing associations and others.
Thank you. And obviously, off the back of the summit, I know that it's one of your manifesto commitments, which I've come back to on more than one occasion in this chamber, about the ending of Section 21 and what more we can be doing from City Hall to try and move that along. We've been waiting since 2019, but I just wondered what the status of the conversations with the government are around that. So
just to remind colleagues, and you've been assiduous in lobbying on this issue since you were first elected. So in 2019, in the Conservative Party's manifesto, which they won the election on, they said they'd get rid of Section 21, no-fault eviction. When Liz Truss became Prime Minister, she did a U-turn and said, no, we're not going to do this. And then that U-turn was overturned while she was still Prime Minister. We're hoping with Michael Gove, now the Secretary of State, who does understand the private rental market, they will accelerate the progress, not just on Section 21, but on a renters reform bill. It's really important, which will include other provisions as well. I've asked to see Michael Gove again soon, and I'll make sure I raise with him the points you've raised about the importance of addressing that issue, as well as the wider issues you raise as well.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Bailey. It's on rent freeze.
Well, Chair, I congratulated Baroness O'Nook, and I congratulate Lord Bailey on his promotion to the House of Lords as well, and wish him the best of luck in the House of Lords. I'm deeply concerned, Chair, about the cost of living crisis and what it means for Londoners faced with the triple threats of spiralling rents, rising energy bills, and the increased costs of household essentials, putting a major strain on their finances. To protect Londoners, I've called for key interventions that will achieve rent freezes for both social and private renters. I'm also calling on the government to give me the power to introduce rent controls in London. Firstly, I'm calling for London's social housing tenants and shared owners to receive a government-funded rebate to compensate for looming rent increases next April. 250,000 households in London pay for their social rent from their own pocket, meaning any rent increase would drag more households into poverty and in some circumstances result in new benefit applications. Ministers are consulting on a cap that would limit social rent increases for the next 1 year or 2 years. But even capped increases would be too much for many to bear, and I'm calling on the government to go further by providing what will effectively be a rent freeze. This would be achieved by giving social housing residents, including shared owners who are currently not covered by the government's proposals, a rebate on any increases that landlords make. The government's proposed rent cap will save public money that would otherwise have been allocated in benefits that would ultimately have been paid to social landlords. This money saved could be rerouted to provide rebates to social housing tenants who pay rent for from their own pockets, meaning that this policy would be fully funded by benefit savings that the government will make whichever level of rent cap it implements. City Hall analysis found that 40% of London's 2.6 million private renters will struggle to meet rent payments in the next 6 months. They need help urgently. This is why I'm also calling on the government to immediately introduce a total freeze on private sector rents for 2 years, both within and between tenancies. This would save the average private renter nearly £3,000 over 2 years. I'm also supporting councils to acquire properties if landlords decide to sell via my right to buyback fund. London needs more social rented housing, more first-time buyer homes, a welfare system that reflects high rents, and fundamental reform of the private rented sector to rebalance it in favour of renters. I'll continue to call for the changes Londoners need to help them make ends meet.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your reply. You repeatedly called for a 2-year rent freeze, but how would this work in practice, and what effect would it have on supply?
We've seen in Scotland they've done it. So in Scotland, Labour colleagues and campaigners lobbied the Scottish Government to introduce a rent freeze, which they did a couple of months ago, as I understand it, and the sky's not fallen in. There's still people renting out their properties. What you're seeing, though, is people's rents aren't going up during the tenancy, and I'd want the same to apply in London. So in London, more than 40% of landlords own their property outright. There is no a mortgage. And the choice is whether we support families in relation to rent freezes so they're not made homeless, or we have profits making a bit less profit. I choose families over profit.
But there's two problems in what you've just said. Firstly, the Scottish model, people are already telling landlords to put their rent up. Even some social landlords are saying to Scottish landlords, the minute this ends, put your rents up. So are they locking in a big, massive step? And would that happen in London if you don't allow landlords to put up their rents or just recover the costs at the end of 2 years? Or are you suggesting a permanent rent cap? And of course, if 40% of landlords own their property outright, it means 60% don't. So they will then be forced into default. And of course, many landlords are not great big companies. They sort of own 1 or 2 properties. It's sort of their pension. So are you happy to have that negative effect of yours?
There's 2 points you raised. One is Scotland, one is the what happens at the end of the period. So in Scotland, Scotland's power to do rent controls as well. So in Scotland, they've got the advantage that we've not got. Both the government listening to Labour and campaigners having a rent freeze, but also when the rent freeze comes to an end, they can also control the rents via the power they've got to have rent controls. So in London, the average rent paid by a private renter is £2,500. So let's use that figure. So a landlord has a choice to either get from a tenant the £2,500 rent frozen, or get rid of the tenant and have zero money coming in. But also we know over many, many years, landlords have made big profits in relation to their properties. If there's a short period of time where they're making less profit, I think that's a price worth paying.
But that's a very simplistic look at some landlords won't be in that position. And realistically, if you talk about renters, let's focus on renters for a second. If a landlord cannot raise their rents for a 2-year period, maybe they'll raise them now. Has this constant stream from you caused landlords to raise their rent now in anticipation of this? And of course, if they have a 2-year period where they're disadvantaged, won't they just ramp it up massively at the other end of those 2 years? What will you do to prevent that?
Well, we'd see what the position is in 2 years' time. If it was the case in 2 years' time, or we're still in the cost of living crisis, inflation was still at the situation is at now, we'd be asking the government to extend the rent freeze, but we'd hope that in 2 years' time we'd have the powers to have rent controls in London as well. And that's why the recommendations for a commission. The commission would have around it landlords, experts, tenants, and many others to come up with a system in London that works for London. But we can't escape the fact that we are in a cost of living crisis. Inflation is now at 11%. The average rent in London has gone up over the last year by 16%, the biggest increase since records began. Families this winter will be made homeless because they can't meet the increased rents their landlords are charging for a short period of time, I think it is proper for there to be a freeze on their rents. The vast majority of landlords, if they've got a mortgage, the increase in the mortgage in terms of interest rates is less than the increase in rents they're charging their private tenants.
But if you look, so firstly, your 16% rent rise figure is not what the ONS is talking about. They're saying that London is still below the national average for raises, and they're talking about 2.8, not 16%. I believe you got that figure from one of those private companies who are talking about the rent that they're offering. That's the first thing. And secondly, what you may be doing then is just delaying the pain of cost of living for people and actually making it significantly worse by putting in this rent freeze, because at the end of 2 years, you'll have absolutely no control over what happens to rents. And of course, we know, you and I both know, landlords will absolutely claim that money back in rises for sure. So why would you do this? And if you look at the experience of countries worldwide, please point out to me and Londoners any place where rent controls have worked.
Let's do those three issues. Firstly, if the member is honestly saying that Londoners over the last year have paid increased rents of 2.8%, he needs to get out and meet Londoners more.
No, well, you're the one who was telling us to look at experts, and ONS are the experts. I'm telling you what they've been saying.
ONS don't let properties in London.
Well, they do look at rent rises in London. They absolutely do. It's part of their job.
So let me be clear, Chair. Sean Bailey is saying that rents in London have gone up by 2.8% over the last year. Right? That's what Sean Bailey is saying.
Let me be very clear. The ONS is saying that.
Right, so I'm saying, and we can ask Londoners to choose who's right, rents in London over the last year have gone up by 16%, the biggest increase since records began. Sean Bailey is saying they've gone up by 2.8%. That's the first point. The second point is during the pandemic, the doom merchants during the pandemic, when I was lobbying the government, I said to the government, please can you not allow landlords to evict tenants during the pandemic, right? And people like Mr. Bailey were saying, if you do that, once the pandemic's over, they'll get rid of them all. Two, I was saying to the government, can you support those who are renting by extending the notice period to 6 months? The government acceded to that, and we were warned there'd be chaos afterwards. And the third thing we were saying is to give mortgage holidays to those who are struggling to make ends meet. And to give credit to the government, they listened. When that period was over, you didn't see the sort of chaos that Mr. Bailey suggested would happen with a rent freeze. Similarly, what it's saying in relation to the rent freeze in London is during this period of time we've got a cost of living crisis. You've seen what the Chancellor said in advance of his budget today about the storm coming ahead in this winter. Inflation, this week announced that 11% is these renters in London, 2.6 million Londoners need support. And the way to do that is a rent freeze. If, as we approach 2 years' time, we're still in a cost of living crisis, there are still challenges, I would be lobbying the government to extend the rent freeze. I would be hoping in advance of that, they give us the powers to set up a commission.
Can I just bring you back to the question I actually asked? Can you tell me somewhere in the world where rent controls have worked? Well, if you look at experience in Berlin, they imposed this policy. They saw a 41% drop in supply, 172% increase in demand. It got so bad they withdrew the policy. A similar thing happened in Stockholm. It happened in Venezuela. Rent controls don't work. They eventually, normally very quickly, end up with private renters paying significantly more rent. Why would it be different in London? Because,
well, firstly, I don't accept the caricature of what's happening around the world, but in London, we're not going to take a model from another city off the shelf and impose it in London. The purpose of the commission is to work with the industry, and that includes landlords, by the way, the build-to-rent sector, tenants, and other experts, to come up with a system that works for London. It's a bespoke system for London rather than off-the-shelf system from Venezuela or where else the member suggests.
Well, Mr. Mayor, it seems incredible to someone that you ask for this power all the time. You have no idea what you're going to do with this power. Your last summit didn't even have landlords in it, so you clearly run out of ideas and are slightly confused as to what this will deliver for Londoners. Private renters know that this will push their rent up. They only have to look at all the examples around the world. Chair, back to you.
There wasn't a question for me, I think.
I think the point is made that there wasn't a question.
Wouldn't you agree?
So, Chair, the question is would I agree with the member in relation to his proposition that rent controls are bad for private renters? I don't agree with that proposition. I think 2.6 million renters in London, the largest we've ever had, deserve the market to be interfered with because the market's not working.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next, I've had indication from two Assembly members who want to come in on this. The first is from Assembly Member Moem.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point that the data around 16.1% is a combination from Rightmove and Property Mark, and Property Mark is an organisation that represents agents, so they're not going to be shy about kind of what they're saying. And just to add that I will be meeting them later this week, so I don't think it's right to characterise the way that, at least from the Labour side, that we're looking at how this might work. It's very much, it needs to work for landlords as well. But it is not right that only 8.8% of homes on Rightmove are affordable to somebody on an average wage. And just to come back to the summit the other day, one of the other points that was discussed was about educational attainment.
So remember, is this a question to the Mayor?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Health of the Londoners. And so my question is, with the powers, if you were given them, and I hope that you are, how would you use them to make sure that those inter-tenancy increases were manageable to people in much the same way it is in social rent? And for those people who have mortgages, they know what their increases are year to year, which is exactly why people are rightly worried about the increases in when they remortgage.
Yeah, and I meet many, you're spot on, many responsible landlords who give long-term tenancies. Many build-to-rent developments. I think in Brent, really good examples in Brent, where the council negotiated at least 3-year deals, so that the build-to-rent developers saying to the tenants, you've got the certainty of knowing what your rent's going to be over 3 years. For the foreseeable future, we're going to have renters in London, even if we massively increase the supply of new housing in London. So it's really important to give people that certainty. But actually, if the key prize is growth caused by increased productivity, if people aren't being stressed about their rent, if they can have a decent education because they're not travelling an hour and a half to get to school because they've been driven out of London because of the rental market, that will increase productivity, which will increase growth. So actually, it makes economic sense to try and fix the private rental market, because the private rental market in London is broken.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devenish, please.
Mr. Mayor, is your rent control policy National Labour Party policy, please?
No, I'm the Mayor of London. Unlike you, I don't speak for my leader. I speak for myself and for this city. And I make sure I stand up for our city. And our city has got real challenges with the private rental market. And that's why I'm lobbying the government to give us the powers to have a rent control commission. If you want a patsy for a mayor, vote for a Tory.
So Keir Starmer supports this policy, does he?
Chair, my
London
policy,
Labour MP, does he support your policy?
So, Chair, my policy is as the Mayor of London and as a champion.
I'll take that as a no, Chair. Thank you very much.
For London.
I never get an answer of this man. Thank you very much.
If London has won a
all,
mayor
Chair.
who will do whatever,
okay.
Who will do whatever their party leader says, you've got to vote Tory, not Labour.
Okay, I think you got the answer you wanted to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just had an indication that Assembly Member Boff wants to come in.
Mr. Mayor, you've talked about the importance of responsible landlords. How many landlords did you invite to your housing summit?
I'll have to get back to you because it was organised by Tom Copley, so I'll write to the member.
You were there, were you, sir?
I attended, but I didn't do the invite, so I'll write to you, let you know how you were invited.
You don't know? Because the figure seems to be 0. Were you not?
The question was how you were invited, how many turned up. So I'll find out the answer to the question and let him know.
So 0 turned up. Is that correct?
The question was how we were invited. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And you're going to write to me on that. How many turned up?
Around the room, I was not introduced to any landlords.
Interesting. Housing summit. Thank you.
It was a private renters summit, but fine.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Best on TfL advertising.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. Decisions on advertising across TfL's estate are taken by TfL. The primary aim of TfL's advertising estate is to generate revenue to be reinvested back into the transport system, which it does effectively. When TfL is doing all it can to reach financial sustainability, it's important to maximise the value from its assets. But in my view as Mayor, I believe it's also important that the advertising it carries is appropriate for London. And that's why TfL operates within its published advertising policy. TfL works closely with its two largest advertising partners, JC de Cox and Global, who are world leaders in their field, to utilise its advertising network. In 2021-2022, TfL generated £97 million in income from commercial media activities, which includes advertising. This figure is sadly still down from before the pandemic, when revenue generated from commercial media activity was at over £150 million. During my mayoralty, TfL has worked to modernise and upgrade its advertising infrastructure. New opportunities were presented by the Elizabeth line, which has 329 new advertising sites, the largest launch of digital advertising assets at one time on the network. TfL and its media partners ensure that advertising across the network meets the Advertising Standards Authority rules and TfL's own policy. The policy requires advertisers to adhere to additional restrictions to those enforced by the ASA and provides high-level principles and procedures about approval of advertisements. The issue of the Men's FIFA World Cup 2022 was discussed at an advertising steering group meeting on the 10th of November. TfL said it planned to provide further guidance to its advertising partners and brands on the advertising which it is likely to consider acceptable to run in relation to the tournament. Each advertising campaign for the tournament will continue to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, but following the approval of the advertising steering group last week, TfL has now issued updated guidance to its advertising partners. Advertising that encourages people to watch matches in the UK or support any of the competing teams is likely to be considered acceptable, as is use of the official World Cup logos. However, advertising that promotes travel to Qatar or portrays Qatar as a desirable destination, or which promotes ticket sales or travel in person to Qatar, will not be considered acceptable at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I raised this with you over a month ago, you said I'd made a powerful point that you'd be taking up to close any loopholes in regards to that specific TfL wraparound of the bus of the Qatar, which I'm sure is an image I'm sure you've seen. You said you'd deal with that sooner rather than later, so I was slightly disappointed to receive a letter from you only at 9 o'clock today, 3 days before the kick-off of the tournament. But nevertheless, having received that letter, you've made that clear distinction through TfL that you feel that promoting an event rather than the location or country is acceptable, but you can't detangle the country from the event of the World Cup. It's so intrinsic to that event. And do you recognise that wraparound around the TfL, that was wrong, or do you accept that that should have been on the network?
I think the ASA guidance on the 10th of November, which is why the letter was so late to the Daily Mail on the 10th of November, is quite clear. You distinguish the country from the football, but accept the implicit issues, and that's one of the challenges the BBC has, the ITV has. There will be government ministers going to Qatar. I'm not going, and you're right, and that's one of the reasons why people claim that Qatar are sports washing, which is because given an image of a country that's different from the reality.
But was it acceptable to have that advert plastered around the double-decker bus with the Qatar logo and the mascot? Was that acceptable?
I think the ASA looked at the policies of others, and nobody has a policy that has no advertising at all of football. But I accept that under the current rules it's possible to promote the World Cup in Qatar, and Qatar's mentioned.
So in the advertising guidance that you sent me, you said that advertising that promotes ticket sales encourages people to attend matches in person or encourages them to attend other events in Qatar will not be considered acceptable. That very advert had the direct link to the Qatar World Cup website, which when you go on, the first thing it tells you to do is buy tickets, get a hotel and fly to Qatar and travel and see how wonderful Qatar is. So how has that been considered acceptable?
I'm not sure about that. If that advert is still acceptable with the new guidance, can I just check if that's the case? I'm not sure that is the case. And the new guidance, if there's a website given to travel to Qatar, which is different to the World Cup logo encouraging the sport of a team, that's different to promoting travel to Qatar. If the member is saying the advert encourages travel to Qatar, that won't be acceptable under the ASA guidance.
The advert on the wraparound of the double-decker bus included a link to the website, to the official website for the tournament. And like I say, on the official website to the tournament, the first thing it does is encourage you to travel to Qatar. I would be much more reasonable with you if we'd have had this conversation a month ago, but we are now 3 days away from the tournament, and I can't see that TfL has taken any urgent action to address that, apart from we had that on the 10th of November. These are really simple bullet points that could have been sent out earlier, and they actually show that we shouldn't have had those double-deckers going around the city, advertising people to buy tickets to Qatar, which is what I raised with you a month ago, and nothing's happened, and that's a whole month of that happening.
That's not quite right, though, Chair. something has happened. So since the last Mayor's Question Time, the committee's met. It met on the 10th of November, and it has a policy that adverts to promote travel to Qatar or portrays Qatar as a desirable destination, or which promotes ticket sales or travel in person to Qatar are not considered acceptable at the moment. So something has happened.
But it hasn't,
now,
because the ads are still on the network, so it can't have happened if it's still on the network. And like I said to you, Mr. Mayor, I'd be reasonable if we'd had this conversation a month ago or 2 weeks ago, but we're now 3 days away from the tournament, and you've set out guidance that doesn't address the issue, because it still allows for the points that for Qatar to be advertised, and it's still promoting people to buy tickets to go to Qatar.
I know how keen this Tory group is on process, and I think the Mayor was just explaining the process which was followed.
Well, the issue is this, Chair, in relation to TfL. The TfL has got a huge advertising estate. There is no other advertising estate in the country that has policies like we've got in relation to Qatar, in relation to the World Cup. It is a fact that many members of the government are going to Qatar, which has caused huge upset to many people. It is a fact that these matches will be shown live on terrestrial TV. It is also a fact that TfL's policies don't allow now adverts to promote Qatar. I'd have thought the member would be, saying that the government and others should be following TfL's lead rather than criticising TfL have gone above and beyond what anybody else has done in relation to this issue.
Your guidance isn't worth the paper it's written on when it's still happening. You can write all the documents you like. If you're still going to plaster London buses with Qatar adverts encouraging people to buy tickets, it's not worth the paper. We're not here to talk about government ministers. I'm here to ask you directly about something you can do. And to your credit, you said you would do, and you haven't. And we're now 3 days away from that tournament, and you didn't do it.
If there's a question, I can answer that.
You didn't do it.
The steering group met on the 10th of November. The issue of the Men's FIFA World Cup 2022 was discussed. There is an action that arose after the Mayor's Question Time that was raised at the ASA. A further action arose from the Advertising Steering Group meeting. So further action arose from that, which is that adverts promoting Qatar, travel to the World Cup to buy tickets are no longer allowed on the TfL estate. And it shows how progressive and far-reaching TfL's policy is. And by the way, the very same group was criticising me in relation to lack of revenues being raised, in relation to limitations on adverts on the estate, and now I'm being criticised for not going far enough.
You have to, if the Mayor's not going to answer the question that's answered, then what's the point?
I want to take this opportunity of welcoming the Year 4 pupils from Manor Longbridge School in Barking, Denham. You have arrived now. Good to see you. Okay. I also want to just remind that we are halfway through and that we should have a comfort break. And I propose that we take a 10-minute break and that we meet again at just say at 11:40. Are we content with this? Yeah. Okay. let's begin from where we left. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Fortune on pathways to net zero carbon 2030.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. My target for London to be net zero by 2030 is now more important than ever. As I speak, negotiators at COP27 are trying to accelerate efforts to slow global warming amongst devastating climate events around the world. London must play its part in tackling the climate crisis in every way we can. I've set out my preferred pathway to the 2030 target. It means significant changes in how we heat our homes, which will require greater national ambition, significantly more funds, and the devolution of powers. The powers I have only deliver a third of the emission reductions we need. Where I have the power to encourage the market to install heat pumps, we're making excellent progress. In 2021, my London Plan policy secured the installation of heat pumps, which are due to serve over 23,000 homes, compared to around 13,000 in 2020, showing the market is responding accordingly. In fact, 28,400 homes have now been served by heat pumps since 2019 in schemes referred to me. However, in existing buildings where I do not have the powers to require improvements, progress is much slower. Only the government has the power to put in place the measures and funding required to hit the target, and I continue to make the case for them to act. Germany is pushing for a target of 500,000 heat pumps a year by 2024. Our government currently plans to support only 600,000 between now and 2030. That's 75,000 heat pumps on average a year versus Germany's 500,000 a year. This government must set a date this decade to ban the installation of replacement gas boilers and focus on reskilling the workforce. They must also require the installation of energy-saving measures whenever a house is refurbished or sold to make them heat pump ready, and support the installation of homes which will not only reduce emissions but save people vital cash during energy price crisis. There are opportunities for the government to take the right steps, such as the reform of the electricity market arrangements. Done right, this will provide the necessary signals to accelerate the uptake of low-carbon heating, including heat pumps. Our work on the pathway to net zero is intended to be the basis for collaboration across all levels of government and with wider partners. I'm totally committed to do all I can with my powers in London, and I want to work with the government to help take forward the changes needed at a national level that will make our city a zero-carbon model nationally and globally.
Thanks very much. I'll just read the question again so we can get the context. In your document, Pathways to Net Zero Carbon 2030, you set a target for 2.2 million heat pumps to be in operation in London by 2030. The question was, how are you progressing toward that specific target, and do you still expect to hit it? Now, I know you gave me some numbers, but can you just pick those out? For this, how many have been installed towards that 2.2 million?
So the ones that I know about from us are 38,000.
Okay.
On top of that, there's the 20,000 figure I gave to you. But don't forget, the target is the roadmap to get to zero carbon, just like the Climate Change Committee's report and the government's targets. And so that's why I mentioned in my answer the importance of collaboration with the government. So the levers that I've got, the London Plan is the best lever, is how we've got our numbers. The big change has got to be on the retrofit and refurb that I mentioned in my answer as well.
So relax, I'm not bashing you. I'm genuinely interested in this one. I think actually that Pathways to Net Zero Carbon document is an ambitious one. Actually, I think there's a lot in there that's really interesting. I think Sir Humphrey might say brave.
No, but on that, Peter, on a serious note, thank you for what you just said. But so Germany has shown it can be done. So if you look at Germany, on the heat pumps, if it's 500,000 a year from 24. They'll get to 2.2 million by 27, 28. So it can be done. And to give our government credit, I think this current government understands the importance of it. And I'm hoping there'll be some stuff today about this. Yeah. But I think we're on the same side, the government and I, in this area. And I think the conversations that we've had, I think my fingers are crossed.
Because there's a couple of real challenges that I picked out of the document. One is around some of those buildings. The listed buildings, especially in the smaller buildings, it's difficult to sort of retrofit those. And also the lack of skilled installers or retrofitters. So just wondering how you're meeting those challenges.
So there are challenges, but the opportunities. Off-grid is a good opportunity. So off-grid is a really good opportunity for us to get those in. So a number of things we're doing is, so in the EB sector, we've now got a number of academies focused on green jobs, installation. Heat pumps is one example. Other examples as well. That's the first thing we're doing. The second thing we're doing is talking to industry about what shortages they've had. And we're linking up employers with the adult education providers and say, listen, talk to each other. These guys can be your teachers training the students and stuff. And so we've seen an increase there. The big thing we've got to do is persuade people that these are good jobs to want to be trained in, and that's the challenge. And without the confidence of a supply line, if you're retraining, why would you retrain when you've got no confidence the government's going to be doing X thousand a year?
Yeah. So the last question just on this point is, who's got eyes on this? Who's checking the milestones being hit?
Within City Hall?
Yeah.
Myself and Shirley Rodriguez, the Deputy Mayor, but also Jules Pipe, because of the skills side that you mentioned as well. So it's skills, it's Shirley, but also it's Tom Copley in relation to new homes, the three of them reporting to me. But again, there is nothing I've seen in the last 3 or 4 weeks that gives me less confidence. I'm more confident, change of Prime Minister, in relation to this area than I was previously.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Hirani. It's about COVID and flu jabs.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. Thanks to the success of the life-saving COVID vaccine, our city is in a completely different place to where we were this time last year. But with winter coming, it's really important that we all remember that COVID-19 and flu have not gone away. That's why I recently had my own COVID-19 and flu autumn booster jabs. Bookings are open for everyone who is over 50 or is considered to be more vulnerable, and to health or social care workers. I remain committed to working closely with partners including the NHS, local councils, UK HSA and OHID, businesses and communities to continue supporting London's vaccination programme. We'll be discussing the pan-London approach to immunisation at next month's London Health Board. We know from the first vaccine campaign about the importance of using trusted voices to share information. We'll continue to share our expertise and networks to reach communities to promote the campaign. For example, our most recent health communities briefing with my Deputy Mayor, Dr Debbie Weeks-Bernard, Martin McRae from the NHS and Professor Kevin Fenton included a focus on preparing for winter and the role of jabs in being ready for any seasonal challenges ahead. Both COVID and flu can be life-threatening, and we must do all we can to protect ourselves and reduce the chances of a twindemic. A record number of sites are delivering autumn COVID-19 boosters across the capital, and the flu jab has been offered at hundreds of GP surgeries and community pharmacies, just like the local pharmacy in Tooting, where I had mine. We must not forget to speak to those Londoners who have not yet come forward for any COVID vaccination. There are still groups and communities across London who are more vulnerable to the disease this winter due to lower vaccination rates. We must remind people that the vaccine is safe. We must make clear to people that it's never too late to get your first dose, and that the vaccines save lives. Your risk of dying from COVID-19 is 93% lower if you've had both jabs and a booster.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. COVID-19 hospitalisations have been increasing since late September in London, and there are concerns that cases will further as people spend more time socialising indoors with Christmas coming up. And the cold winter also makes people with long-term conditions more susceptible to serious illness. According to the latest data from the 2nd of November, there are currently 1,238 people currently in hospital with COVID-19 and 81 on mechanical ventilators. This is up from June, where there were 845 in hospital and 40 on mechanical ventilators. Are you worried that complacency around vaccines may reduce take-up in London this autumn and winter? And how can City Hall help to mitigate this?
One of the ways we're addressing this is to speak to the community organisations that was so invaluable when we began this journey just over a year ago. I remember you taking me to Kingsbury Temple in your patch, the first temple in the world doing COVID vaccines. And so we've got to use those trusted voices in relation to the twindemic that you referred to. So the increase in numbers, the reason why you shouldn't be alarmed is because they started from a low base. That's the good news. So in percentage terms, a big increase is worrying, but actually the numbers, I've been reassured by the health team, is not a concern as we go forward. The big concern is if somebody gets both these illnesses this winter and if you're vulnerable. And the other concern is those who've not received any immunisation at all. And so we've got to go back again and again and again and not write off those individuals and those communities.
And we all know about the huge strain on the NHS already and the impact that this twindemic can have. We already know about the 7 million waiting in hospital for treatment following the lack of investment in our hospital infrastructure and NHS in general. And we all know about the vacancy rates, which is also impacting services. How are you supporting the case for London's hospital infrastructure and capacity and this staffing crisis?
Well, I think often the word crisis is overused. In this case, it isn't. We have a crisis in the NHS because of a variety of issues, not least vacancies, record numbers of vacancies, not least the under-resourcing. This winter, I'm afraid, is going to be particularly acute. So we don't now talk about a winter bed crisis because it's all year we have a crisis in the NHS. You'll have seen the report last week about the numbers of people who are waiting to go to social care, but the crisis in social care is exacerbating the problem in our hospitals. So although I've got no direct control of the NHS, I work closely with colleagues in the NHS to make sure that we're working closely with the councils in relation to social care, but also doing what we can to support the NHS in relation to recruiting new staff. And there are record numbers of vacancies, compounded without doubt by the hard Brexit.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Baker, and it's on TfL capital investment.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that after extensive negotiations with government, we were able to reach an agreement which provided TfL with funding until the 31st of March 2024, but it's far from ideal, and it's left TfL with a significant funding gap. I had to introduce a £500 million funding facility that TfL can call on to balance its budget. TfL's immediate priority now is rebuilding its finances after the pandemic. As you know, TfL is working flat out to achieve financial sustainability, but the sooner TfL has certainty of capital funding, the better. Certainty would give TfL the ability to properly plan and design schemes in an efficient way that both maximises benefits but also minimises costs to the public purse. Delivering large-scale new infrastructure can take many years of planning, design, achieving required consents, and then delivery. These are critical projects that would support the new jobs, homes and growth that London needs. Smaller projects, such as many local street improvements or renewals of existing infrastructure, have a shorter ramp-up time. TfL has a pipeline of these, which means that TfL is able to bring schemes forward within months rather than years. And this is what TfL is doing following the August funding agreement. TfL's new business plan, which will be published shortly, will set out the medium and long-term investment needs of London's transport network. TfL is already engaging with the government to explain this plan and discuss the priorities we all share. The government's recognised that TfL will, like every other transport authority around the world, need continued funding for capital projects. I remain hopeful that the government will recognise the significant benefits investing in London's transport can deliver for the UK economy and for shared ambitions like reaching net zero. I hope these benefits will be recognised in the funding support offered beyond April 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't realise that when I put this question in it would be so timely, really, as it seems to me as very important to think about the difference between investment and decline, which seems to be the question before a lot of politics today. But in terms of specifically transport, obviously, you know, the spending review submission called for 1 to 1.5 billion of government capital funding every year, and the choice before the government is obviously between jobs and growth and sustaining London or decline. So the recent funding deal didn't even offer the level of support asked, and now we're sort of facing potential funding cuts across all sorts of services, and how optimistic are you that the Secretary of State understands the importance of investment, long-term investment in capital projects, considering the situation we're in at the moment?
Well, look, your question's appropriate and apt in relation to timing for two big reasons. One is because actually, look, one of the things the government's got to do today in its autumn budget is to reassure the markets, right? That's what the government's talking about because of the chaos caused by, inverted commas, the mini budget. Well, actually, the markets will tell you that one of the things that gives them confidence is investment in infrastructure. Why? Because that's an investment in the future that leads to growth and productivity, high-skilled, well-paid jobs. They pay taxes. And I'm hoping the government realises that actually the one way to reassure the markets is to invest in infrastructure, and that means transport. Clearly, London benefits the entire country, not just London. So I'm hoping that's the reason why they respond in a positive way. Secondly, I met the new Secretary of State recently. I know him from my previous life as an MP. I'm looking forward to work with him. I know him well. He understands the importance of transport. He understands the importance of investment. Clearly, he's got to negotiate with the Treasury a decent deal for transport, and I'm hoping that he does well in that deal from Treasury, which will lead to investment in infrastructure and capital.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I hope so too. And just haven't got very long, but so just a really quick answer in terms of the really big infrastructure projects that would benefit London, Crossrail, Bakerloo Line extension. They're on pause again, as we all understand. If they were to be restarted, when do you think those sort of projects could become a reality for London?
So we've got shovel-ready projects. Piccadilly Line, we've got the trains ordered. New signalling, if that was to be done, we could turn the taps on straight away, make a big difference in relation to productivity there. Crossrail 2, basically the plans are there. The business case is there. We've got safeguarding done. We could turn the tap on pretty quickly there. Bakerloo extension south, safeguarding is in place. Plans are in place. We could turn the tap on pretty quickly there. So there are plans in place already. There's big plans in relation to major junction improvements, safer junctions, step-free access, so forth. So we've got lots of plans in relation to investment that brings in benefits in relation to growth, productivity, and so forth.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. The next question is on national planning reforms in the name of Assemblymember Sheikh.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. Yes, I remain extremely concerned about the proposed changes to legislation and national policy. The introduction of an unworkable infrastructure levy, centralisation of planning policy and subversion of the London Plan and locally prepared plans in favour of new national policies are all concerns I've highlighted repeatedly to the Government. The proposals undermine the role of local, neighbourhood and mayoral policies in deciding planning applications and is simply a Whitehall power grab. These reforms also serve to erode public participation in the planning system. There are cross-sector concerns that the infrastructure levy would be far more complex and less effective than the current developer contribution system. Across London, it will deliver less desperately needed affordable housing and transport and community infrastructure, whilst also putting less viable developments at risk. The GLA estimates that the levy could have resulted in a loss of between 4,500 and 10,000 affordable homes in strategic applications over the last 3 years. Under the levy, infrastructure payments will be delayed until later in the development process, meaning that the community facilities required to support development will not be in place when needed. A more effective approach would be to retain and improve the current system rather than introduce the levy, which ministers have indicated would take the rest of the decade to implement. At the very least, the Government should let planning authorities decide whether to introduce the levy if they think it would be more effective than the current system. I'd be happy to work with the Government to develop a more effective approach, drawing on our expertise and experience of securing developer contributions in London.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I think these planning reforms have been long awaited. I think I remember discussing this with you at least a year ago. And it looks like we're finally in crunch time. So we've got the reforms, they've gone through the House of Commons, they'll be coming to the House of Lords. What worries me is the fact that they are so under the radar. Planning is such an important area of governance. It shapes the very design of our cities, and I think people in COVID-19 realise on an everyday level how their city design has an impact, whether it's mental health, access to transport or general well-being. So if we are seeing wholesale reform coming through national government, more should be done to be discussing this at a community level in terms of public engagement. And as you've already alluded to, many of the reforms would undermine public engagement. So before we go on to discuss the levy, I wanted to just drill down on the national management development policies, because one of the impacts this could have is undermining the sovereignty of London's planning system through our London plan. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the impact on the capital that would have, given that already we know that the London plan, whether that's in building affordable housing or embedding the climate emergency in how we build, is way ahead of national planning policy. So what would the impact be if we saw these reforms undermine the London plan?
Well, you're spot on, by the way. So in London, our plans are far more progressive, far more advanced than the national policies, which is why there are better design, better developments in London. If these plans materialise in the way some want them to do so, less control for local residents, less control for local councillors, less control for City Hall, less ability for us to affect the benefits we need by negotiating with businesses and developers. But I make this point. During the passage of these reforms, we've had not one, not two, 5 Secretaries of State. Right? So I've got no idea if Secretary of State 5 agrees with the inception and plans that Secretary of State 1 had in relation to the purpose of this bill. If you're a developer or a business person, how can you have certainty to want to invest and develop if that's what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I share your lack of confidence in the government and the dysfunctional way of managing reforms or more broadly governance. But let's talk specifically on the infrastructure levy that you mentioned. So I'm sure it's obvious to many, but the infrastructure levy is a piece of reform that would replace other mechanisms right now that allow us to negotiate with developers on important things such as affordable housing or building local infrastructure. Now, with the infrastructure levy, there's many things that have concerned local councils, community groups, but one in particular, a sort of more recent amendment, is this idea that infrastructure levy money could be used to subsidise local councils' budget. So you could see money that previously went towards building affordable housing and infrastructure now being used by councils to subsidise services. Quite frankly, this looks like the government attempting to subsidise 10 years of their policy of austerity, and I think that's unacceptable and a total undermining of what an infrastructure levy should be. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that particularly.
I think it's a good example of cost shunting, by the way. Look, there's a number of reasons why it's a bad idea. Firstly, one of the reasons why residents give permission for an application and support it is because they see other benefits, what's called planning gain. So I'm very happy for this building to be built, because we will benefit from a garden being built next door to it as a direct consequence of the building being built. If it's the case that any benefit goes elsewhere, nothing to do with the community, nothing to do with the development, what's in it for the community? What's the planning gain for the community? That's the first point. The second point is it's cross-subsidy. It's using a development to cross-subsidise public services that should be provided by central government. Bear in mind how centralised we are. And I think it's really important for the House of Lords to put pressure on the government to reverse those provisions, but also for us to persuade the government that actually this is a false economy, because what you're doing is you're losing consent and assent and permission from residents, but also you're not funding public services properly. A development is not the way to fund the library.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assemblymember Desai on hate crime.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this question. Hate crime reporting across our country, including London, has sadly followed an upward trend for many years. These crimes cause distress to individual victims and whole communities. I'm quite clear, though, that any attack on any Londoner purely because of who they are is an attack on all of us, and my determination to take a zero-tolerance approach to hate crime is undiminished. My police and crime plan includes several specific commitments on hate crime, and much of that delivery is underway. I'll work to build community confidence and resilience by commissioning a hate crime outreach programme to support organisations who are rooted in their communities to better understand and respond to hate crime. I've invested over £2 million into my Shared Endeavour Fund, supporting 72 projects across London that counter racism and extremism. An independent evaluation has demonstrated that the fund has reduced racism, intolerance, hate and extremism in the capital. To ensure victims receive the specialist support that best meets their needs, MOPAC has established London's first genuine pan-London hate crime victim service, and the victim satisfaction levels of those accessing the service are very high. With a view to having an impact on those who commit hate crime, MOPAC has also commissioned an evidence search for what works in addressing offending behaviour. The Met Police Service continue to work with targeted communities through the independent advisory groups, and alongside MOPAC in the Hate Crime Stakeholder Reference Group, they've got a clear set of strategic objectives and key performance indicators, and they report their progress on these measures directly to the community through those forums. Chair, we'll continue to work together with all of our partners, communities and campaign groups to make our city safer for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and some good work being done there. So I have two supplementaries. Mr. Mayor, football-related hate crime has risen by around 200% since 2017/18, with 108 out of the 384 offences in London. There are many initiatives to combat this, including one by Assemblymember Emma Best, her LGBT inclusivity in football campaign, which I was pleased to support by attending and speaking at an event in City Hall. I'm currently myself meeting with London clubs, football clubs, at all levels to see the work that they're doing to combat this sort of crimes. I met Millwall recently, and I'm meeting Chelsea next week, and will be compiling a report. Would you be willing to meet with me and the clubs that I meet to discuss their experiences and my report and how best we can help them from City Hall?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to meet you. I want to commend you for your work in relation to tackling racism in football and showing racism the red card. You know that sports and football can be a unifying force, but also can lead to divisions, and so I'm really happy to meet with you and colleagues to discuss this.
Absolutely. I would add, Assemblymember Polanski was also at that meeting as well. Mr. Mayor, we already talked about the World Cup in another context in response to a question from Assemblymember Bast. The World Cup in Qatar begins this weekend. There are well-documented concerns about that country's record on workers' rights, human rights, and LGBT rights. Qatar can't be allowed to use the tournament to sport wash its atrocious record on these issues. Thousands of migrant workers have died building the stadiums, and an excellent 75-page report 2 weeks ago by the group Epidem, a labor organization, documents the exploitative conditions that these workers face. And the Qatar World Cup ambassador says that being gay can damage the mind, to which our Foreign Secretary James Kirby says that LGBT fans need to show a bit of flex and compromise. I've got the article in front of me, to which Gary Lineker responded by asking of the Foreign Secretary, does that mean don't do gay? Mr. Mayor, shouldn't football and all sports be for everyone?
Absolutely. And you know, I think Gary Lineker has made it clear that when he's commentating on the games, he's not going to hold back in expressing his views on the issues you raised. And the reality is that we can't allow any country to sports wash its record, whether it's workers' rights, whether it's rights around LGBT issues, whether it's human rights issues. And there'll be somebody, trying to have Gary Lineker cancelled. I'm not in favour of having Gary Lineker cancelled, although some may be.
Mr. Mayor, Peter Reid last night on news that was excellent, because there'll be thousands of Iranian demonstrators at the England-Iran game to make sure that the Iranian football team do not act as apologists for the murderous Iranian regime. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly Member Desai. I have an indication from Assembly Member Prince wants to come in this.
Thank you, Chair. I must say I welcome all your comments this morning on racism and how you're tackling that. Are you aware of the recent Employment Tribunal which found that there was a culture of racist bullying at the London Overground headquarters run by Arriva Rail? Mr. Mayor, will you condemn this, and what will you do to drive these practices out and ensure a cultural change at London Overground?
I wasn't aware of that tribunal case, but if that's the finding, of course I can condemn it. Can I take that away and look into the tribunal judgment?
Yeah, would you? Because one of my local reporters, Charlie Thompson, asked for a comment from your office yesterday, and they refused to give a comment, which I was quite surprised at, really.
I suspect because I was a bit distracted yesterday on other issues, but I hadn't seen the tribunal. I hadn't seen the tribunal judgment, but it's a serious issue, as you know. That both of us take it seriously. Can I look at it today and get back to?
Thank you, Mr.
Charlie. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Devenish on Argentina, but it's withdrawn now. But the Assembly Member would like a written answer to that, please. I'd like to all withdraw questions. So next question is now in the Assembly Member Garrett on water fountains.
Thank you for your question. We all know that we're in a climate emergency, and part of tackling that emergency is cutting the use of single-use plastic. Single-use plastic contributes to greenhouse gas emissions at every stage of its life cycle, with 99% of plastic made from fossil fuels. On top of that, tiny particles of single-use plastics are being found almost everywhere in the air we breathe, in our rivers and oceans, in animals, and now even in us. To support Londoners' switch to refillable water bottles, I've partnered with Thames Water to install a network of 110 public water fountains across the capital. This programme aims to help Londoners access free drinking water when out and about, whilst reducing single-use plastic bottle use and waste across the city. Despite COVID, the programme was successfully completed this summer, achieving my London Environment Strategy and Manifesto commitments, and is complemented by my Refill programme, which is providing more than 4,500 locations, including shops and public buildings, where Londoners can fill up their reusable water bottles for free. Our water fountains were installed in visible, high-footfall locations to ensure that they'll be well used, meaning the benefits of the programme, including a reduction in single-use plastic bottle waste, would be maximised. The programme aimed to provide water fountains that had a distinctive design that was easily noticeable in busy locations and readily recognisable as somewhere drinking water could be refilled. The fountain model had to be a Water Regulation Advisory Scheme approved, ensuring they are clean, safe and durable. Along with high footfall and visibility, accessibility was an important factor being considered in both the selection and site locations and fountain design. GLA officers undertook an accessibility assessment of the fountain model that was installed to ensure that as many Londoners as possible can use the fountains. Consumer testing was carried out to ensure the fountain model met the key design criteria and was easy to spot. Data from Thames Water shows that since we implemented the programme up to September 2022, the fountains have dispensed nearly 800,000 litres, the equivalent to more than 1.5 million single-use plastic bottles. I'm also supporting 40 schools with drinking fountains to help to increase the number of water-only schools, improve public health and well-being whilst cutting the use of single-use plastics.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, the aim was worthy, the objective was good, but the design is one that only a mother could love, isn't it, really? I mean, my concern is that London is full of iconic design. It's full of imagery that is used to represent the city, as sort of emblematic. And this one is clearly not going to be one that finds its way onto tourist T-shirts and bags and sort of design clip art of London. Did you seriously give thought to making it something that would become a sort of classic, iconic design, improving the sort of beauty of our public realm?
That wasn't the primary consideration. It was a consideration.
But do you not think that should be a consideration whenever you're adding anything to the public realm? Do you not think that should be part of the consideration automatically?
Well, the consideration was the issue you mentioned. The aesthetics is important, clearly. The cost is important. Easily accessible is important. The maintenance cost is important. Them standing out is important. One of the things that Thames Water did to reduce costs was to, rather than having a bespoke design, was to, frankly speaking, buy it off the shelf. It was an off-the-shelf product, which they then adapted. And also the issue was quantity as well as quality. Clearly with the Victorian examples that I know some people find attractive, the cost is far more than these ones.
So it was a sort of low-cost, off-the-shelf option. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll leave it there. I think you've answered my question. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Boff on the independent sexual violence advisors and independent domestic violence advisors.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. My VORG strategy is clear that all victims and survivors should receive the right support through access to specialist support services. This includes the vital work of independent sexual violence advisors, ISVAs, and independent domestic violence advisors, IDVAs, who provide a lifeline of practical and wellbeing support. Since I was first elected, I've overseen more than £100 million investment in tackling the scourge of violence against women and girls, including over £45 million in specialist support for victims and survivors. In recognition of the increased and unprecedented demand for domestic abuse and sexual violence services we saw during and following the pandemic, MOPAC was successful in securing an additional £19.5 million since July 2022 from the Ministry of Justice. This includes a further £4 million in funding for new IDFAs and ISFAs in London. I've also committed an additional £18.7 million investment in services to tackle violence against women and girls. This investment has resulted in an additional 43 independent domestic violence advisors, 38 independent sexual violence advisors, and 3 specialist domestic and sexual violence advisors across London. And this is on top of the 88 advisors already funded by City Hall, making a total of 172 advisors funded by and through my administration. At present, there is no university recognised legal definition or accreditation for these roles, but we know the upcoming Victims Bill is seeking to address this. It's my expectation through commissioning, however, that organisations can evidence quality assurance, including sector-recognised accreditation of individual IDFAs and ISFAs, or evidence they're working towards accreditation with a respected accredited body. In addition to our commissioned IDFA and ISFA provision, I fund 41 specialist and buy-and-for services through the Violence Against Women and Girls Grassroots Fund. This fund includes capacity building to develop professional standards and peer networking with accredited providers. Since 2019, I've funded 6 specialist services to manage the increase in demand. Some of these services use their funding to employ and train IDFAs and ISFAs. I want to be clear, though, that support offered to victims and survivors should cover the breadth of journey from prevention to resettlement and recovery from trauma. I'm satisfied that our refreshed VORG strategy places prevention at the centre of everything we do, with the necessary focus on education, enhanced partnership working and public engagement to ensure we work together to end violence against women and girls.
The MOPAC annual report of 2021-22 says that you will fund the appointment of an additional 21 independent sexual violence advisors and 23 new independent domestic violence advisors in London. Have they been recruited?
It says 43 additional ones. I'm not sure if they include the ones you mentioned. How many continue?
So, I mean, it looks a similar figure.
Yeah.
Is that so? That's the figure that the additional is those that were in your plan.
Yeah. My briefing says additional 43 advisors, and so I'm assuming that equates with your figure.
And they are in post.
Correct. Yes, they're in post. I beg your pardon.
They are
yeah,
in
yeah,
post.
yeah.
Thank you. Despite those people still being in post, we still have a shortage of support for those who are supporting victims of sexual violence. If you go on to the web page for the London Survivors Gateway, they regularly now have a message on there saying that they are closed and to call back next Tuesday because of I mean, and this message has been here for some days, because of the shortage of independent sexual violence advisors. Do you intend to tackle this problem in future, in addition to what you've already said you've done?
Yeah, we are, but it's worse than you say, actually. Thank you for raising this. So it's been closed because they can't meet the demand, and so rather than giving a poor service to those they have, they've said, look, we've got to be honest with you, we can't meet the demand.
This is not a criticism of them. On their pages, on their front page, they say, we recognise that there are not enough support for survivors in London. We are trying to advocate for more support services.
Spot on. So thanks for raising that. So yeah, no, we do. And to give credit, which is it's important I do, the MOJ recognises a problem, which is why we were successful in securing the additional money in July. Not enough, clearly, but we recognise there's a problem. We continue to lobby the government for additional funds, and we've raised the money we give as well. But they do a brilliant job, and you're absolutely right to highlight that. But it's a crisis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question is on retrofit and reducing energy costs in London. It's the name of Assemblymember Cooper, who will then meant to metamorph into land development supplementaries. The process is ongoing.
I'll answer the question first, and then allow whoever Leonie's morphed into to ask the supplementary questions. Improving our buildings is the most effective and critical action we can take in response to the cost of living, energy and climate crises. It's outrageous that we've seen a decade of government inaction on this. I'm doing everything in my power to improve London's buildings and create good green jobs. Our £44 million Mayor's Academies programme will support Londoners into good work, including retrofitting. Delivering the scale of retrofit required will mean retrofitting over 210,000 homes and 26,500 public and commercial buildings each year. I don't have the powers required to deliver the systemic interventions needed to address these crises. Where I do have powers, such as through my London Plan, I've set the highest standards in the country for new net zero carbon homes and commercial buildings. My green finance programme is providing finance and working to attract more government and private sector investment by creating a new financing facility. My £43 million Warmer Homes programme helps low-income Londoners make their homes warmer, greener and cheaper to run. My Accelerator programme offers support to drive retrofit across London's social housing, public buildings, and to transform the way London generates, stores and uses clean local energy. And my Retrofit Accelerator Workplace programme has helped improve over 650 public sector buildings, including schools, hospitals and council offices, saving at least £7 million per year on energy bills. My Business Climate Challenge supports businesses to drive down bills. Energy efficiency action is urgently needed, though, to bring down bills for London's estimated 800,000 fuel-poor households and achieve our climate goals. The government must play its part and act now. They must devolve powers and a fair share of funds to London, scale up action and implement a national effort to invest in multi-year retrofit programmes.
Thank you. As you can see, I have morphed into Assemblymember Cooper. So I wanted to ask you, Mayor Khan, just your thoughts on what we may expect from the budget today for London to really deal with this problem, and particularly with the cost of living crisis. It now has a potential, more funding for retrofit has a potential to really deal with cold, damp homes, and I refer again to the South. We've seen the real life consequences of what that can lead to at the extreme. But I just wanted to ask you, so devolved administrations in Scotland and Wales have received 3 times more funding than London, and it's my understanding that London was not really mentioned in most recent discussions. How much has this lack of investment held back growth in the green economy in London?
So one of the reasons why this investment is important is it sort of kick-starts it as a catalyst for the private sector and others to get involved. So you mentioned we don't get a fair share. We roughly get about £29 million from the energy company obligation. We're very grateful for the £29 million. We should be receiving £130 million annually in relation to this, and this would make real progress, creating jobs, well-paid jobs, supporting families, but also reduce energy bills as well. I suspect we won't get the details in relation to how much we've received today. That'll probably be in December, but we really need some good news here, because actually this is one way to reduce people's energy bills, really big issue in cost of living crisis, but also gives us energy security as well, and it's less carbon emissions. It's a win-win-win. And that's why it makes sense investing, and it gives the markets confidence as well, because it shows we're investing in our future.
Thank you. Thinking about the extremes of inequality that we suffer across different parts of London, which we've seen exacerbated by the energy crisis. I'm really glad that the government has gone up to £3,000 support for average use, but that still isn't going to necessarily cover it for many, many households. Just what your thoughts are on how retrofit will help level up inequalities in Londoners' experience.
Well, it's worth reminding ourselves that, yes, I mentioned the 800,000 households in fuel poverty, I mentioned that in the past. But if energy bills go up by just 1%, and £3,000 is the average, that drives more people into fuel poverty, which is why the phrase, it's not just a phrase, choosing heating or eating. You're literally having to make a choice. And that's why it's so important for us to do what we can to reduce bills. Energy efficiency means reducing bills, insulation, double glazing, and so forth, heat pumps that have been mentioned by Peter Fortune. And so these are all ways to address the issue of bills, but also address carbon as well, and create well-paid jobs. And so we're hoping the government invests long-term rather than short-term things, which may deal with the supply side, but doesn't deal with the big issues. And there are systemic problems in the energy sector.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Clark, and it's on energy costs at the London Fire Brigade.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Assembly Member Clark for the question. Like many organisations, the London Fire Brigade has experienced increased energy costs for both its estate and fleet. Attempts to forecast future additional costs have been factored into the Brigade's budget submission for 23-24. It's currently very hard, frankly speaking, to predict how costs might change over the coming year. I know the Brigade is monitoring the situation closely and has taken a proactive approach to reducing energy consumption where possible. This includes upgrading their building management system to enable them to identify buildings that have a high energy use or could benefit from energy reduction. Energy audits have now been commissioned on buildings with known high consumption, so options for investment and behavioural change can be investigated. The LFB has a series of specific energy reduction projects, for example, low energy lighting, solar photovoltaic arrays, combined heat power units, efficient boiler replacement programmes and building fabric insulation improvements. Walthamstow Fire Station is the Brigade's first carbon net zero fire station, demonstrating some of the excellent work being undertaken in this area. This activity reflects the Brigade's support for my target for London to be net zero carbon by 2030. Despite these ongoing efforts, high energy costs continue to pose a significant challenge for LFB. The Brigade has raised concerns about the impacts of increased energy costs directly with the Home Office. The government can't continue to expect LFB to meet these costs and needs to step in and provide funding if energy costs continue to rise.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. And I do congratulate the work of Walthamstow Fire Station and the LFB generally in doing the important thing in trying to address the climate emergency by retrofitting, and but also it becomes increasingly important because it does reduce their bills as well. One thing that's been a concern to me and has been a concern to the LFB is the dangers of people sort of creating their own ways to warm their homes. And we had a house fire in New Malden, and the LFB came out and warned about the dangers of placing combustible materials near open fires. Are you concerned about Londoners turning to open fires in their homes and the impact that will have?
Look, I am concerned, but if you could imagine if you're a mum or a dad wanting to keep your children warm, keep yourself warm, your elderly parents warm, and if you're scared about turning on your gas or electric heating for obvious reasons, an open fire is an obvious thing to do. That seems, risk-free, cheap-free, and so forth. As of the first week in November this year, the fire brigade had attended 180 related fires during the colder months this year, which so is a source of concern. It's going to get colder in December and January, and maybe February. And so, the London Fire Brigade are trying to give advice to the public in relation to the dangers. They're doing. They've got an online home fire checker you can do, so anybody can just check it themselves as an easy and free way to check whether their homes are safe. And I think all of us are leaders in our communities, and whatever we can do to educate people about the dangers of this, understanding the fears they have, it's really important we do so.
It's really important, and I have seen the work of the fire brigade engaging with communities, as we all have across London, and it's important they continue to do that. I'm just wondering, though, on a slightly different topic, is lots of Londoners are doing the right thing by installing solar panels, and but there then is a question of the implications of on-site solar PV generation for fire and emergency service personnel. How is the LFB seeking to deal with those implications, given the increased take-up of solar panels?
Your question is a good example of how the work of the LFB continues to evolve. I mean, who would have said 10 years ago the LFB would have to deal with concerns around solar panels and so forth? That shows how they're evolving. We discussed at a previous meeting grass fires in London, right? And so the fire service is keeping on top of technology in relation to what they've got to do to combat these issues. But the key piece of work here is around prevention. And the fire brigade, like many public authorities that deal with health issues, believe in the public health approach. Prevention is better than dealing with the consequences. So they're working with experts, institution of fire engineers, working with community groups in relation to good advice, making sure expert installation, but also making sure they're on top of their own skill set to deal with issues raised from these issues. And the other point that you've raised before is the issue of battery storage. These are also concerns that emerging issues that we need to educate the public on, and commercial buildings as well, about the dangers of battery storage as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think this is an opportune moment for me to ask to seek your permission to extend the meeting. Is to say, will the Assembly agree to suspend Standing Order 22.9b in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business of the agenda to be completed? Agreed? Thank you. The next question is on the paper in the name of Assembly Member Bukhari on minority groups and food insecurity, but it'll have to be a written answer because they're at time. And the next question, therefore, in real time, is Assembly Member Polensky on home insulation skills gap.
Well, thank you to the member for his question. Better insulation of London's home plays a key role in meeting net zero targets, tackling the cost of living crisis, and improving the quality of Londoners' health and well-being. The scale of the challenge is considerable, but the opportunity for skilled green jobs is also huge. The insulation of London's homes needs a workforce with a range of construction skills, from energy auditing and design through to installation and retrofit. To address these skills needs, public and private employer investment in training is required, both for the existing workforce and for new entrants. I'm pleased that business-led local skills improvement plan in London will prioritise green jobs and skills. City Hall will continue to support its development in partnership with London's business groups. Through London's £320 million annual adult education budget, I'm supporting training in building and construction along with other key green courses. Earlier this year, I launched my £44 million Skills Academy programme, with green skills being established as a priority sector. As part of this, I've been clear that one of our aims must be to support greater diversity and inclusion in the sector. My Skills Capital programme will become available in spring 2023 for investment supporting the provision of green skills. And I've also launched my Skills Bootcamp for Londoners programme, which covers the green, construction and digital sectors. And this complements my Skills Academies and will provide short, high-level skills training in these priority sectors. City Hall will look to develop skills bootcamps in London to respond further to retrofit and wider green skills demands, subject to continued DfE funding. Construction jobs offer rewarding long-term career opportunities for Londoners, and as part of my careers programme, I'm promoting green job opportunities across all secondary schools and post-16 education. And this includes a series of green career events as part of Climate Kickstart, coinciding with COP27, to which I know the Assembly member has been invited. I'll continue to call on the government to fund a long-term retrofitting programme for buildings across the UK. This is essential to meet the challenges of both the climate and cost of living crises, and must include a clear strategy to deliver the training needed to support employers to recruit and train the skilled workforce they need.
Thank you. Can I begin by saying that the Conservative government need to make a massive sustained investment in retrofit, and to have not done is an abject failure, and actually they're spending billions of pounds of taxpayers' money on energy subsidies when we have some of the leakiest homes in Europe, and that's not acceptable. I want to turn, though, to what we can do. And actually, we saw the Green Homes grant debacle, and actually, when the supply chain wasn't ready, that ended up being another failure. So we need to be like a coiled spring, ready to go for if this investment does come. But right now in London, across the UK, we have less retrofitters, people ready to do it, than in the past decade. There isn't one single London college that runs a retrofit coordinator training course. And also, according to a report you published in January, there's no adult education funded courses specifically for things like retrofit. So can you reassure me on the actual numbers of people trained or training for retrofit or upskilled for retrofitting?
I think you've highlighted, as a question I dealt with Peter Fortune, the problem is, look, can you hand on heart say to a young person or somebody retrain for this skill set when you can't guarantee work down the line? And so it's a chicken and egg situation. So we do know that the AEB sector wants to step in, and they're dexterous and flexible now in relation to providing these courses. We do know some of the private sector are really keen to help the AEB sector. And if we had a long-term plan, even 3 years, by the way, that would give some certainty to people to be retrained, because people are currently in jobs. We're giving them free training if they're in a minimum wage job or low-paid job to be retrained. What they need is some confidence there'll be jobs to go to. What we've said to the AEB sector is we want them to better monitor, nobody else does it around the country, people's employability once they've done the course. And if we can have, after a year, examples to point to saying, by the way, X% of our students who did this course got a job, that'll give confidence to others to retrain as well.
This sounds a little bit like something your Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe said to me, which was the Mayor cannot dictate to colleges that they'll train people for whom there's currently no job demand. But there's a retrofit London Housing Action Plan, which you've said you're working closely with London colleges to implement. And they've said existing colleges and training programmes should be made aware of the demand for retrofit qualifications and skills. So they think there's demand. I've spoken to Installation. They think there's demand, and 2/3 of young people in the UK want these green jobs. So why did you declare a retrofit revolution, and then 18 months later we're still having this conversation?
Because we're, as far as the country is concerned, way ahead of the rest of the country, way ahead across the country in relation to retrofitting our homes, but we need to do much more. And the answer I gave to Peter Fortune was about the target we had, where we've got to get to. It requires a revolution. We can't do it by ourselves, though. And that's why it's really important we get support in relation to not just heat pumps, not just insulation, not just renewables, but other areas as well. The AEB sector is ready to step up. We know that Londoners want to be reskilled or trained for the first time in high-skilled paid jobs. What we need is some certainty there are jobs to go to. And we've got to be honest with you, what we don't want to do is sell London as a pup. Say, get retrained, huge expense to yourself, huge expense to the AEP college, get big numbers trained, and there aren't the jobs to go to.
Just because I'm running out of time, on the AE budget, £320 million that you do control, 32 million of that is going on the Good Work for All fund. There's 40 providers, and you've said to my colleague Sean Berry last September that you will support new provision retrofitting with these 40 providers. Which of these providers actually does retrofitting? Because at the moment it looks to me like it's none of them.
Chair, I think the member's suggesting that I have the list of 44 in front of me, that I've gone through the list of 44 in advance of his question. Clearly I haven't, and so what I'll do is I'll write to him to give him the answer he
It'd be
requires.
appreciated, because the biggest one, construction skills people, takes 744,211, but there is no retrofit or insulation courses available. So I'd appreciate you writing to me with which providers do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Ahmed on the childhood hunger in London.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. It's clear that the main driver of food insecurity is incomes that are too low for people to reliably afford enough food. London had unacceptably high levels of food insecurity even before the cost of living crisis hit. This is directly linked to more than a decade of austerity. I identified this challenge in my first manifesto. I then published the UK's first regional measure of food insecurity, and I've continually spoken out about the changes we need to see. Fundamentally, the issue requires significant and urgent action from national government. This must start by expanding free school meals to all primary school children, increasing benefits by inflation, and scrapping the benefit cap, two-child limit, and no recourse to public funds conditions. I'm doing all I can to address the causes of food insecurity in London as part of a broader programme of work on financial hardship, including spending £5 million to connect Londoners with welfare and money advice, including a broader range of support that can help ease the pressure of the cost of living crisis. These projects work with a range of organisations embedded in their communities, including those that specifically support families with children. The next iteration of my Food Routes programme will include a specific focus on improving access to Healthy Start to help reduce food insecurity among families with young children.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, as you know, whilst we have been sitting in this chamber, the Chancellor this morning has been delivering his autumn statement. The choices outlined in that statement will have a huge impact on our city and on Londoners. At a time when wages are falling in real terms and the UK is facing a recession, we are set for higher taxes and cuts to public services. The national living wage is going up by less than inflation. Benefits are only being increased by 10.1%. Remember, inflation is now up to 11.1%. And this increase comes into being next April, which is 5 months down the line. So families across the country and in London will be facing a really critical and crucial time in their own economic choices. The choice today was of political choices. One choice we saw was a refusal so far to extend free school meals to all children on universal credit. Analysis by the Child Poverty Action Group shows that 210,000 children living in poverty are missing out on free school meals. At this moment in time, if the Chancellor does not mention free school meals, and he is speaking at the moment as we know, if this is not mentioned, is this a missed opportunity to help feed those children and to stop them from going hungry?
I had the privilege of speaking to colleagues in Wales where they've introduced free school meals for all children in primary schools. It can be done. There are 4 councils in London, Labour councils, by the way, who are providing free school meals for all their children. It can be done. And we know how restrained and tight budgets for councils are and will continue to be. I received a free school meal when I was a child. It was a game changer for me and my family. But there's a huge stigma in relation to being that kid in the queue, getting your free meal token. But also there are many children who are going to be driven into poverty as a consequence of minor increases in energy bills in relative terms, the cost of living crisis. So a very simple thing the government could do, it costs about £400 per child for a year, is to have free school meals for all primary school children. And it goes to the point about productivity and growth, right? If a child is hungry, how is he or she going to be productive at school? If a parent is skipping a meal to feed their kids, how are they going to be productive at work? So it's an example of a lost leader, if you like, where you invest in our children. Sure, it's a loss of £400 per child per year, but the investment you get is in that child, is in the classroom, is in the school, and the family as well. And I'm hoping that you're wrong in relation to what the Chancellor announces today and not going ahead with it. I'm hoping he does go ahead with it.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, as you know, the Chancellor and the government are very good at blaming all sorts of reasons for the reason that we are in this situation in this country and the impact that this has had on Londoners. The one thing that they never mention is Brexit. I wonder if you could tell us what you think Brexit has had, what kind of effect Brexit has had on food insecurity for Londoners.
Well, listen, let me be quite clear. I think Brexit was the biggest self-inflicted economic harm any country's ever done to itself. And I think we're seeing the consequences of a hard Brexit. Independent experts, the OBR, have said we've had 4% less growth because of Brexit. The NSC have said there's at least a 6% increase in food prices because of Brexit. You heard Krupesh Hirani talking about vacancies in the NHS. So when you compare and contrast vacancies in London in September 2022 versus September 2019, before the pandemic, 80,000 vacancies September 2019, 140,000 vacancies being advertised in September 2022. These jobs aren't being filled. And by the way, one of the causes of inflation being exacerbated is vacancies in the job market, right? Because people, not unreasonably, there's an issue there. And also it's an issue that affects lack of productivity. So I think what you see now are the consequences of a hard Brexit. And it gives me no pleasure in saying I told you so.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And Mr Mayor, what would you like to see the Chancellor today announce in his budget that will affect the poorest Londoners, particularly around food insecurity?
So the ask we've got that deliberately focus this winter going forward is we want to see the increase in benefits to inflation, really important. Free school meals for all primary school children, really important. I'd like to see him return the £20 universal credit payment per week, incredibly important. We want to see announcements in relation to infrastructure investment in London, really important for confidence going forward. And so we've set out a number of requests to the Chancellor that there are more than that. And we've also worked with London councils in relation to a joint request to the government as well in a whole host of areas. The one thing we definitely do not want to see is austerity 2.0. Many things we're seeing across London, you mentioned food insecurity, as just one example, are the consequences of that austerity, which is a political choice made in 2010. And what you're seeing now is the government blaming all sorts of reasons, the mini budget, the war in Ukraine, and other reasons that they point towards for the challenges. Let's not forget the lack of growth over the last 12 years is a direct consequence of the austerity in 2010 and subsequent years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Berry. It's on transport fares in a cost of living crisis.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. The government-induced cost of living crisis is impacting Londoners heavily. With many Londoners struggling to pay for the basics, I'm determined to do all I can to help, including ensuring our public transport system is as affordable as possible. Despite the pressures on public funding, it's important for everyone that we can keep public transport as affordable as we can, to help people get by during the cost of living crisis and to help ensure London can continue to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. I'm proud that despite almost no support from the government, I've kept fares on public transport low. In my first 5 years as Mayor, I froze all bus and pay-as-you-go fares on TfL services and only increased them when required to do so by central government as part of the DfL funding deals caused by the pandemic. It's important to note that our fares freeze continues to have a lasting impact. Fares would be much higher now following the recent government-led increases had my fares freeze not kept them low for so long. I also introduced the Hopper fare, which allows passengers to make unlimited free bus and tram transfers within an hour. Nearly 750 million journeys have now benefited from the Hopper. Transport for London also provides a generous concessions service to millions of eligible Londoners. I've protected the 60-plus Oyster card and the Zip cards for under 18s, despite the government's best efforts to remove these vital concessions. Discounted fares are available in London for many people, including some students, apprentices, veterans and job seekers. National Rail card holders generally get a one-third discount on off-peak pay-as-you-go journeys. Although we have finally reached a funding agreement with the government, the deal still leaves TfL facing a significant funding gap and some difficult decisions remain. I'll continue to do everything I can to help Londoners, especially low-income Londoners, making ends meet and prevent further financial inequalities so we can continue to build a better, fairer and more prosperous London for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate from all that you've said there that keeping fares down is a goal you've set yourself. But I am particularly worried about bus fares, since these are used by many people as a cheaper option. Now, since the last election, the bus fare has gone up by 10p, despite the pledge in your manifesto where you said it's a priority to keep fares, in particular bus fares, as low as possible. And now my worry, which I've raised with you before, is if bus fares now follow inflation, they're going to get unaffordable. In fact, if you followed inflation, the bus fare would easily get above £2 by the end of your term. So my question is, what are you going to do to prevent this? And can you pledge to freeze the bus fare at least and keep it below £2? Because that is a really high figure.
Well, it's because it's a priority to me that it only went up by 10p when the government wanted a far bigger increase. And it's because it's a priority to me that I didn't accede to the government's demand. It was a demand to remove free travel for children using our buses. I'm afraid the deal with the government is one which does cause big challenges for us. And so Londoners know my record in relation to fares, and I'll do whatever I can to keep all fares low, but particularly bus fares for the reasons you've said.
Okay.
Not only is it poorer Londoners use buses, but often there's no other form of public transport.
Exactly for that reason, yeah. So hopefully bus fares will still be a priority for you. Now, of course, we're all getting lots of concerned messages from over 60s in London, including via Age UK, who came in with a huge petition of 10,000 names earlier this week. We don't think that restoring the pre-9 a.m. benefit would be that much funding to find in this year's budget, and they've already put up with this for 2.5 years. So my question is, how high up in your priorities are Londoners over 60 going to be when you're thinking about the next budget and keeping fares low?
Well, it's a big priority because I've got an interest in that. I'm approaching that age, and so it's I've got skin in the game in relation to this issue. Again, another demand the government had was to get rid of all free travel for those above the age of 60. I didn't accede to that demand either from the government to get rid of free travel for everyone
I don't
above the
think
age of 60.
Londoners would let you ever do that. But can you bring back the pre-9 a.m. as soon as you can? I don't think the actual cost of doing that would be as high as you might think.
So firstly, the government is also requiring us going forward. So the government has said we must find new increased income sources of between £0.5 billion and £1 billion per annum from 2023. That's a condition of the pandemic deal with the government, and so we are trying to make sure we don't breach that deal with the government. The only reason why we've had to remove free travel for older people below the age of, before 9 a.m. and after 4:30 a.m. is because of a condition from government.
We're freer to do that in the new deal. It says as long as we pay
Barry,
for it,
you're
we
out
can
of time.
have it.
You're out of time, Mr. Mayor. The Greens are out of time.
Yeah, the Mayor understands perfectly well the terms of the deal and that you could pay for it. So we'll see what happens.
That was extra time coming off the next time round.
Chair, I think that's an abusive process.
Okay. I have an indication from Assemblymember Duval.
Issues of decision making. It was very clear it was your intervention, your battle with government that saved that over 60s point of view. Of course Londoners would be upset, but it needed to have a devolved politician standing up to central government to defend London's interest. It's quite clear the government was intent in taking that away at the time that it was having those negotiations.
But let me be frank, and this is why it's really important that we remind Londoners of this issue. So the government said you've got to take it away. If you're going to keep it, you've got to find the money elsewhere. So what I had to do, and it was a political choice I made, was to increase the existing TfL element of the council tax. It's a political choice I made in relation to this, and that meant that the TfL precept in the council tax, £20. So I could have chosen to do what the government told me to do, remove all free travel for those above the age of 60, but I chose not to do so because it's an issue of social justice for me, and it's really incredibly important. And so it's just worth reminding colleagues that these are choices made by politicians elected by Londoners to do so, and there are further choices down the road to be made as well. So, for example, if I was to bring back free travel before 9 a.m. and after 4:30 a.m., that'd be a choice, but there'd be a price tag to that. And I think children's free travel is really important. I think it's really important to keep bus fares low, which seems to be a priority for the Greens as well. And so these are tough choices, but I think they are tough choices, but I'd rather an elected mayor of London took those rather than a civil servant in Whitehall or a Secretary of State in Westminster.
And is it right in saying, as we go forward over the coming years, I mean, the consequences are people talk of a recession that's going to last 2 years, but the consequences of austerity will last a lot longer and impact that. So the challenges of protecting this important service for Londoners, and particularly low-paid Londoners, is how do we protect the quality of the service? You've already taken a decision to reverse some of the cuts. Well, I think we all welcome that. And that, again, is because you are in this position to do that. How do we go forward in terms of not managing decline, because I don't think we can afford that, even in austerity, of maintaining quality during these difficult times, because they are difficult times.
Look, the point I'd make in a respectful way to the new Secretary of State, Mark Harper, is we're allies. Look, we both want our country to be successful. We want growth. We want productivity. You've got a big job as the Secretary for Transport, big challenges around the country, High Speed 2, Northern Powerhouse. Let us get on with your support running London so you can focus on the areas where there are genuine concerns which need addressing from Whitehall and Westminster. And we don't think that we're a problem, because we contribute £40 billion net per year from our great city net, by the way, which can be redistributed around the country. And look at the opportunities there are in London going forward. The Great Elizabeth Line, the trains built in Derby, signage in Isle of Wight, sewage is secured from a firm in Leeds, the new buses built in West Yorkshire. So think about us as an opportunity, not as a problem to be managed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Tory group have 37 seconds. The last question is the name of a member Prince on Emerson Park aggressive burglaries and robberies. So here we go. In answer in 37 seconds.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, could I just ask you? I'm going to have a public meeting on this issue. It is a real grave concern to the locals. There's some terrible abductions and people being stripped naked and abducted and abandoned in fields.
Chair, so it's not, do I not get to answer the question first?
You do. Could I have it in writing, do you think, Mr. Mayor? But I was just going to ask you whether yourself or your deputy would be prepared to possibly attend a public meeting.
Mr. Mayor, you may answer the question. How is he fit?
So my understanding is the question's about the aggressive burglaries and robberies. Sure, yes. Thanks. So I've been in touch, Chair, with the Met Police Service, who are aware that 2 burglaries took place in September and caused some alarm amongst residents. As a result, the neighbourhood...
Mr. Mayor, can I ask you to make this answer in writing now, because they are out of time now. Oh. So perhaps you can just send it in writing to them. Yeah?
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Assembly Member Desai.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, along the same themes about crime, because many of the people who commit these crimes, burglaries and so on, which is a concern all over London, also commit hate crimes. And I want to raise in particular the issue of disability hate crime. So according to the Disability News Service, less than 2% of disability hate crimes are passed on to the CPS, and the lack of support for disabled people who experience hate crime. And the Inclusion London are particularly critical of MOPAC, Mr. Mayor, who they say prioritize hate crime, but who they argue are given very little funding to support the fight against disability hate crime. Will you please look into it?
Well, Chair, with your permission, can I also deal with Senator Prince's answer through to decide if that's okay, if that's allowed? Which is thank you.
Just bring to the words Emerson Park somewhere there.
Sure. So what I was going to say, Keith, is incredibly distressing if you've been the victim of burglary, and I know how distressing it is for your constituents around this area. And the police are aware of the concerns that you've raised and the distress it causes the victims. And so what I'll do is I'll go away and speak to my team about what we can do to assist you in the public meeting, because it's really important that we give the public confidence that with a new commissioner, these things will be taken seriously. And, for example, one of the things he's done, the first things he announced is anybody who reports a burglary should see a police officer, right? Because you need to pass on what's happened and so forth. And so thank you for raising this issue, which I know is distressing for your constituents. And
appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. And thank you.
It relates to some of Desai's question as well, which is this can be exacerbated and compounded when the motivation is hate. It's bad enough when it's an acquisitive crime, when somebody invades your home, your personal space, and takes things away from you, goes through your personal possessions, or robbery. When it's a hate crime, which is motivated for just being who you are, for being brown, for being a woman, for being gay, for being disabled, for being elderly, it goes to your identity. And so what MOPAC are seeking to do, we're not perfect, is to try and deal with targeting those people who are susceptible to, become potential racist and xenophobes and so forth. So do let's source with these people, support those victims and communities who are affected by it, but also make sure that there's proper enforcement against those who do these things. They're caught, they're charged and so forth.
Thank you. And if you could ask MOPAC to look into the worries of Inclusion London. I'm not saying they're right, but that's how they feel.
Understood.
So, Mr. Mayor, many members of this Assembly from all parties, we went to view the operations of the CST, the Community Security Trust, a very impressive group. And then we also visited synagogues locally and local schools. It was distressing to see that religious institutions and primary infant schools in 2022 in London need security guards. But also, the work that they do try to build a cohesive society. The infants Jewish school that I went to had stuff about Diwali, for instance, on the wall. So I just think on behalf of the Assembly, What are you going to say?
Yeah, so look, firstly, Senator Desai, thanks for raising this issue. Senator Clark has also raised this issue with me because her constituents are at the receiving end of anti-Semitism. The reason why it's both heartbreaking and should anger us is children in schools and worshippers in synagogues are requiring security for no other reason than who they are, and that can't be right. And so I want to commend the work of the CST, the Community Security Trust, to do a fantastic work complementing the work of the Met Police Service. We've got great partnership with the CST, as indeed the MPS has, and that's why you got to make sure you deal with it at source. So anti-Semitism at source has got to be dealt with. It's arguably the oldest hate crime that we know.
And they work with other sort of religious groups as well, CST. And on the final note, Hope Not Hate, can I ask you to commend their work? Last week I attended the launch of a book by their chief exec, Nick Lowles, on Tommy Robinson, the founder of the EDL. Fantastic work, a fantastic group. Would you join me in commending them?
I would, and I'm hoping that Nick sends me a copy of his book free of charge. But if not, I'll have to buy one. But
I
Nick,
do pay it.
but
I
Nick's,
have
yeah, I know you
donation
did.
as well.
I know Nick. I'm not surprised. Listen, Nick's done great work over decades, as indeed you have.
At personal physical risk as well.
And the reason why it's important to tell his story is A, gives us a chance to commend him for the work he's done, but also some of the stories just remind us that even now we've got people who are trying to divide our communities, pit us against each other and stuff, and the work of Hope Not Hate is crucial now more than ever.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're going to fight all crimes, robberies, burglaries, hate crime. Thank you.
Do you agree, Mr. Mayor? Let's put a question at the end.
Right. I think I'm better.
Okay. Look, it's wonderful to see how there's been cross-party working and how we got the answer for Assemblymember Prince. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for your answers. And can I ask the Assembly to read the motion which is set out in my name, that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? You'll be delighted to know that we have a lunch break now, but the next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be a plenary meeting which will take place 2 p.m. this afternoon in this very chamber. And there's no urgent business, so see you 2 o'clock.